Call to order the Murray City Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, July 1st, 2021. It is 6:30 p.m. Present this evening are Commissioners Sue Wilson, Travis Ney, Lisa Malkiewicz, Ned Hacker, and I am Mary Patterson. I am the chair. Excused this evening are Commissioners Jeremy Lowry and Jake Pearson. From staff tonight, we have Zach Smallwood, Susan Nixon, and Jared Hall, and Bryant Farnsworth is with us as well. Welcome to our first in-person meeting with members of the public this year. We have been on Zoom, and so we're happy to have you. We're grateful for citizens attending and participating in these meetings, so thank you for being here. I just wanted to quickly go over some etiquette items for the public. We just ask that you'll take a moment to silence your cell phone if you have it. And if you do need to take a call, please step out into the hallway. Tonight's Planning Commission meeting is being live streamed at murraycitylive.com. And we will take public comments, and we'll go over what to do when you have a public comment at that time. So we'll begin our agenda item. We have a few business items to do first. Our first item is approval of minutes from our June 17th meeting. Did everyone have the chance to review these minutes and any changes or corrections or anything to be made?
Good.
They were look
Madam
good.
Chairman, I'd make a motion that we approve the June 17th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting minutes as written.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Agenda item number 2, or conflict of interest. Do any of the commissioners have a conflict of interest with any of the agenda items tonight?
No.
No, neither do I. And agenda item number 3 is approval of our findings of fact. We had one findings of fact for KL Ventures, a conditional use permit for a private gym. We reviewed it. Were there any changes or questions or anything? Okay, Then I'll entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion to approve the findings of fact for a conditional use permit for Karen Larson doing business as KL Ventures to allow a private gym business within the MG zone.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Agenda items number 4 and 5. We will move on to our conditional use permit. We will have both of those presented together. So is the applicant here this evening? Great. We will first have our staff report by Susan Nixon.
This will be interesting, first time in public. Hope all goes well. Okay, this application for Jefferson Park number 3 subdivision is being requested from Boardwalk Industries, and the applicants are present. The property is at 6527 South Jefferson Street. It's located in the R18 zone, which is residential single family. Couple of photos of the existing properties. Upper left is an existing duplex, and the upper right is an existing single family. And then the other two are views from the rear of the property. And the lower right is actually from a stub street, 130 West. In reviewing this application, we discovered that we had never really made a determination on the duplex and the single family. So prior to deciding which avenue to have the applicants go through, we made the determination that the duplex and the single-family home are both legal non-conforming. They were built in 1950 and 1955 and met the code at the time, which allowed them to be on the same parcel. In order for them to maintain that, there can't be any changes, or they could not split the properties. Otherwise, the duplex would be required to be gone, removed. So based on that, the applicants decided to exclude that portion of the property that the duplex and the single family are on. So this diagram kind of shows what we're talking about. The property, the current boundary line between the two parcels is shown with the red line, and they have proposed to move the property line about 65 feet to the west in order to maintain the duplex and the single family. Because the properties are parcels by meets and bounds, state law does allow planning staff to review and approve those requests. And so the applicants applied for the boundary line adjustment. We had various city departments review it. They met the conditions we felt. And so we approved that, and that has actually been recorded as of yesterday. But our maps have not been updated for that. So the actual application is for 4 lots shown in the blue. The red, again, is not part of this application. The 4 lots will be accessed off of 130 West, which is currently a stub street. So that would be nice to actually have it go somewhere. The applicant has requested to have conditional use for the residential infill, which is allowed by code. The residential infill does allow for some deviation from the regular R18 standards. They will meet all of the regular R18 standards for the lot size and setbacks, with the exception of only one, and that is the front setback. The residential infill allows a 20-foot front setback, where normally it would be 25 feet. And all the lots are well over the 8,000 square feet. They're 10,000 plus, large lots. And here's a copy of their subdivision plat, blown up. It will have a public road, which will meet public standards of a 50-foot right-of-way with park strip, sidewalk, curb gutter, and the full width of the asphalt required by our engineering division. And I believe, let's see, we sent out about 63 notices to all the residents within 300 feet. We only received 1 phone call from one of the neighbors and just wanted to clarify what the proposal was for. So based on the review and approval for the lot line adjustment, the subdivision application, our residential infill, and the R18 zoning regulations, staff is recommending approval of the 4-lot subdivision as proposed, subject to meeting a lot of conditions, 1 through 11. And I am happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the commission for staff? Okay. Thank you so much. We will have the applicant come up and just state your name and address at the podium for the record.
My name is Cheyenne Winget. My address is 6573 South John David in Murray.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Have you had an opportunity to review all of the conditions of approval?
Yes.
Yeah, and you'll be able to comply? Great. Is there any additional information that you would like to present to us about this application?
No, we're just excited to have 4 very comfortable single-family homes. They're going to be able to be built there, and property that's sat vacant for 50 years. And so I think it'll do the community well. I actually live just a couple hundred feet away from it, and I'm looking to enjoy one of those myself.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you so much. At this time, we will open the meeting for public comment regarding this item. So you can sit down. We'll have other public come up. If you would like to make a comment on this agenda item, you can do so at the podium. We ask that you please state your name and address for the record, and that you keep your comment to 3 minutes. And we also ask that any comment that you make, you present new information about this application, not just the same concerns over and over. So if someone would like to make a public comment for this application, please feel free to come and make your comment.
Hello, my name is David Jones. I live at 6513 South Jefferson. I did call the phone number listed on the paper that we got. I did not receive a call back. So I haven't had a chance to review any of the information. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what zoning ordinances are being broken or changed. I'd appreciate a call back and some information on what exactly is going on. Another thing I noticed on this piece of paper, we're listed as 2 of the properties, David Jones and Christine Jones, my mom. We both live in one of these houses, but we're listed as 2 of the properties, so I'm not sure if that other property owner has been notified as well. And that's all I have because I don't know anything about it besides what I got in the mail, which doesn't state what's going on. So,
Yeah, and I am sure staff would be more than willing to have a more in-depth conversation with you if you have any specific questions that you want us to address right now.
any of the height requirements changing on the homes? I mean, without reviewing what exactly is changing, I don't know what questions I potentially have.
Okay.
So
We can address that after the public comment portion. So thank you so much. Any other comments on this agenda item? Okay. Seeing none, then I will close the public comment period and bring it back to staff. If you want to just quickly.
Well, I'm looking at a copy of the notice, and it does have our phone number, the 270-2420, which is our main phone number, and that is answered live 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. So I'm a little confused on the phone number that you called. Oh, the phone number that is on the notice, and I have a copy of it, is the 270-2420, our main line, and that's answered live 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. I apologize if, for whatever reason, we didn't get the phone call. I certainly would have returned your call. Happy to, and I'm happy to explain in more detail if you'd like. There is no change other than, I mean, they are meeting the current regulations of the R18 code, which is what your homes would be zoned also. They're not deviating from anything other than the 20-foot front setback, which is allowed by our code. The maximum height allowed is 35 feet, which is 2-story. And sorry, I'm changing the pictures here and I'm not realizing it. So let me go back here. So do you have any other specific ones? I'm happy if you want to come in tomorrow and I can review it with you. No problem. It would be just like a regular residential subdivision, similar to what. They could have 2 stories. There's a maximum height of 35 feet. So that's a 2-story home. That is a possibility, yes. And I don't know, they haven't proposed the homes yet, and those will come in. If the subdivision is approved, then they would just simply apply for building permits for each individual home.
Okay, great.
Did I answer all?
Any questions for staff?
I'd like to ask Susan 2 quick questions.
Sure.
Was the packet posted online?
Yes.
So the information we have here was online, available to the public?
Yes, that was available on Friday afternoon.
Okay.
And it still is available.
Just through the notices, I think, but they're posted every public meeting. They're posted online for anyone to review, any citizen.
And we are always welcome to come into our office. It's open 8 to 5. There's no limitation. We don't, with COVID, we're open, so.
Can I ask you one more question, Susan?
Yes.
The need to change the setbacks for the front of the house only applies to one of the 4 houses that's being built, right?
Well, we would just give it approval for all of them for a 20-foot. Now, they could certainly set back further if they wanted, but they can have up to minimum of 20 front setback, yes.
Okay. And I think when I read the packet, only lot number 3 is even considering that. All the others would be 25 setback further. So to me, it looks like everything on these 4 properties that they're requesting is exactly fits what everyone in the rest of the neighborhood is required to do. There aren't any changes in their requirements.
Correct, yes,
Okay.
but does give them the flexibility to have the 20-foot if they so choose to do. Yeah.
So I like to clarify, so the zoning for this property, it's the same as exact zoning
Yeah,
as it
it
is
does-
for your property?
Yeah, the zoning
And
isn't
for the
changing.
properties to the north, to the south, and to the west?
just the way she's putting it, I could potentially have a house closer to my property than the code allows.
No, they will follow it's the same zoning as what you're in right now. So they have to meet all the requirements of that zone.
Same height restrictions, everything.
Setbacks, backyard setbacks, all of those things.
Okay, but the setback,
She's talking about the front of the houses on the circle.
Yeah. Yeah, so your home would, the standard is a 25-foot rear setback, and they will have to meet the same setback as the other homes in the area.
In my understanding thus far, of course, we don't have, the project's not done. It's just this initial. But so far, they're not only meeting, they're exceeding most of the requirements so far. The lot sizes are bigger than required.
Substantially
bigger than
yes.
required.
Yeah, 8,000 is the minimum, and I think the smallest is 10,200, and then 10,400, 14,000, and 18,000. So they're well above the minimum
Yeah.
required. Yes.
And they're single-family homes, which everybody wants a single-family home.
Yes.
No cul-de-sac.
That's all they can have, a single family. Yes.
And if you have any further questions, I invite you. Staff would be more than happy to answer any questions you have about that. Is there any further discussion amongst the commission or any further questions?
No.
Okay, then we can call for a motion.
I'm sorry.
I can have questions after the motion, but that doesn't mean anything if then I have an issue with it.
If he has comments, he probably should come up here.
No, I was going to
But
say,
you've closed the public
out of
portion,
deference
so-
for the minutes
Do
that
you want
have
me
to get
to-
typed up by somebody, she's not going to get any of that. I know it sounds loud in here, but on the recording, none of those comments that weren't into the mic are going to get,
Right.
we're not going to have record of those.
Do you want me to reopen the public comment portion for him to be able
The
to?
commission wants to, you would have.
What
to,
does
yeah.
the commission feel?
I'm fine with hearing and answering a couple questions.
Okay.
This is all
Then
just
I
zoning
will
questions.
reopen the public comment period so you can ask the questions that you would like. If you'd please state your name and address for the minutes.
David Jones, 6513 South Jefferson Street. I still have concerns not being able to read and look through the proposal. I mean, you guys can tell me whatever, but without being able to look through it, I have concerns. That's what I'd like to state. So I object until I find out exactly what's going on and I'm able to read through the paperwork. That's it.
Oh, thank you for your comment. I'll close the public comment portion, and I think we'll move forward with discussion or a motion.
I think in advance of a motion, just clearly stating that they're asking for the same rights that you already have as a property owner on your property. You can come in and do exactly what they're attempting to do here with your property should you choose to redevelop your property. They're not asking for anything above and beyond what the code allows them to do. So, in all reality, they are simply coming in here and asking if they can take a piece of property and put 4 different lots on that piece of property. At the end of the day, that's what they're asking for. And, I think it's really important to understand that the zoning for you is exactly the same as the zoning for them, and that offers you all of the same abilities.
And hopefully, everyone on this commission is neighbors, residents, and we take the job seriously, and we ask a lot of questions. And the fact that we're not asking too many questions today is there isn't anything different than what would be expected in a normal request. No outliers in today's discussion, I would think, right?
Mm-hmm. None that I saw. Okay.
And then is this 2 separate motions or a single motion?
One.
Yes, you actually should technically do 2 separate motions, one for the conditional use and then one for the subdivision, preliminary and final, both if that's what the council or commission decides to do.
Okay.
Okay, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion. I make a motion the Planning Commission approve a conditional use for residential infill approval for the Jefferson Place number 3 subdivision on the property address 6527 South Jefferson Street, subject to conditions 1 through 11 as submitted.
I second that.
Oh, sorry, Matt.
Okay. Thank you. I have a motion by Commissioner Ney and a second by Commissioner Hacker to approve a conditional use permit for residential infill for the Jefferson Place number 3 subdivision on the property address 6527 South Jefferson Street, subject to the 11 conditions. Is there any discussion on that motion? Okay, then we can take a vote.
Yes.
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 Yes, motion passes. So then the next would be for residential infill and preliminary and final subdivision.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I make a motion the Planning Commission grant preliminary and final subdivision approval for the Jefferson Place number 3 subdivision on the property address 6527 South Jefferson Street, subject to conditions 1 through 11 as submitted.
Is there a second?
I'll second that one as well.
All right. I have a motion by Commissioner Ney to approve or to grant preliminary and final subdivision approval for the Jefferson Place number 3 subdivision on the property address 6527 South Jefferson Street, subject to conditions 1 through 11, with a second by Commissioner Hacker. Any discussion about that motion?
No.
Okay, we can take a vote.
Mr. Payne?
Yes.
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 Yes. So both motions pass. So good luck with your project. All right. We'll move on to agenda item number 6, preliminary and final subdivision approval for Jesse Knight subdivision. Is the applicant here? Okay, great. We will first have a presentation by Susan Nixon.
Okay, this application is on behalf of James and Bart Warner for a preliminary and final subdivision for the Jesse Knight subdivision located at 5510 South on 3rd West. Their property is located in our manufacturing MG zone. I'm sure all of you are familiar with seeing this property. The upper photo is from the east and the lower photo is from the west. I actually went on to the adjacent property owners to take the photos. Sorry, Nat. And then just additional photos here. So the property is known as the ore smelter site, the old ore smelter site, which has a lot of contamination on the property. Actually, I'm going to go to that subdivision plat here. And the applicants have been working on this project for many years, I will say that. As part of their proposal to improve and renovate the existing structure, they need to have a clearance from the DEQ for the contaminated soils. And there are a lot of contaminations more on the north end of the property. In order to develop it, they have come up with a plan to where they will relocate the majority of the contaminated soil to the north end, which is shown as parcel A. And then they will be able to build on lot 1, well, renovate the existing structure and develop that part of the property. This will require approval from DEQ. They'll have to go through that process in order to get permits. A few years ago, they applied for a variance for the landscaping improvements, as shown on the photo here, along the frontage of 3rd West and adjacent to the tracks. The variance was granted, so they are not required to install the landscaping in those areas. Let's see. The applicant will, if the Planning Commission approves the subdivision, the applicant will be required to come back and apply for a conditional use and go through that process for the renovation and the site plan. So, based on the review of the subdivision and the existing site and our code requirements, we are recommending approval. Preliminary and final approval for the 1-lot subdivision. And we sent out notices. We did not receive any comments back from anyone or concerns. And the staff is recommending approval subject to the 9 conditions outlined.
Any questions for?
Do we have any images towards the north of the property?
Well, you know, because that place is like Fort Knox and highly gated. I will admit I had to stand on the overpass wall. That
Actually, your east view photo is perfect. There is there an actual physical right of way underneath the overpass? Is there a can I get across that without
under that? You can't get through it, but there is an area under the overpass.
The fill on the overpass goes all the way to 5300 South?
I think so, yeah. You know what? It's been a long time, and maybe the applicant can, I think so. It does go over to where the bridge crosses over.
Okay.
Maybe he can explain a little more.
Yeah, but there's not like some dirt road underneath there that goes over to the properties on the east or the east side of.
Well, there is, you can see in the left east view picture, there is that road access, dirt road, which that is the city's right of way, which they will incorporate with their project.
Okay.
And that will remain, we have to keep that open.
But that doesn't go to the property on the east side of the overpass.
Oh, no, sorry,
Okay.
no.
That's all I'm trying to understand.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other question? Okay. We can have the applicant come up and state your name and address for the record.
Hey, my name's James Warner, and my office, is that sufficient?
Sure, yeah.
Is 5396 West, 2400 South, West Valley City.
Great. Thank you for being with us tonight. Have you had an opportunity to review the conditions of approval?
I have had an opportunity.
And you'll be able to comply with those?
I believe so.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Is there any additional information that you would like to give the commission tonight?
No, I think everything's been presented.
Okay,
Thanks.
wonderful. Thank you so much. Then at this time, we would like to, I'll open for public comment, public hearing regarding this item. If there's anyone that would like to speak to this agenda item, you can do so by coming to the podium and stating your name and address for the record.
I'll say something.
I mean, you're here, so.
My name is Nash Williams. Can you hear me? I'm at 5459 Commerce, so I've got the extra space property across the street from it, and also the budget rental lot across the street from it.
Yeah.
I don't have any problems with the project that I know of. I just wanted to see if I could get a overview of what the current intent is before I understood that it was going to be a office structure, and I just didn't know if that's still the case.
Yeah.
Or if that's changed.
Okay,
It's a question, not an issue.
great. We can ask the applicant that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, then I will close the public comment portion. And do you quickly want to just address that question? At the podium would be great for the minutes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, our intent is to pursue the office option. It's not guaranteed, but that's our intent. It's either that or consider keeping it as a gang hideout.
Let's hope for the office.
Don't forget public art installment.
Exactly. Okay, well, is there any further discussion or questions about this item? We can call for a motion.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that the Planning Commission grant preliminary and final subdivision approval for the Jesse Knight subdivision on the property addressed 5510 South, 300 West, subject to conditions 1 through 9.
A second.
I'll second.
Okay. I have a motion by Commissioner Wilson and a second by Commissioner Malkiewicz to grant preliminary and final subdivision approval for the Jesse Knight subdivision on the property address 5510 South, 300 West, subject to the 9 conditions. Is there any discussion on that motion?
Can I just make a comment?
Yes.
This is the little train that could.
I know, we're all
keep
rooting
believing
for
in you, and I
it.
keep believing in you, and I keep believing in you. So
Maybe this is one step closer.
Yes.
We're all hoping.
Yeah, we are.
We hope you can, we hope you can, we hope.
That's true. Oh, there you go. That'd be,
At the current pace, no, our pace, yes.
yeah, our city hall. All right, we can call for a vote.
Yes.
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 Yes. So motion passes. Congratulations. One hopefully one step closer to
Just keep
your
swimming.
vision coming.
Just keep swimming.
Yeah,
Just keep
exactly.
swimming.
we're all crossing our fingers for this one. So, all right. Agenda item number 7. Land use ordinance text amendment. This one's a public hearing. I said that wrong on the last one. Sorry. For accessory dwelling units.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Commission. I appreciate that. So like you just said, this is a text amendment to Chapter 17.78 accessory dwelling units. So first, I'd start off with why are we here? So I'd like to begin with just saying, that the state recently passed during the 2021 legislative session, passed House Bill 82, which is the legislature's attempt at helping to curb some of the housing affordability crisis the pretty much statewide is happening. In your packet, I called out that Salt Lake County's expected to grow by over 500,000 additional people by 2065. So we need to find places for those people to live. One of the ways that the legislature believes that can happen is through accessory dwelling units. So as opposed to letting the cities decide how and when to do accessory dwelling units, there have been some pretty strict ordinances in other cities that restrict them even more so than ours. Some that have said you couldn't be more than like 300 square feet. They're really small. The legislature decided to say that they'll just be allowed in internal ADUs. So let's continue by doing. I mentioned internal ADUs, so let's go to the next section here, which is a kind of defined ADUs. We have attached, which is right here on your left-hand side, which means it's within the main dwelling. So it could be in an addition or a basement, a completed basement. It even could be above an attached garage. We have seen that happen before. I believe it was last year. The commission approved one above a garage attached to a house. So as opposed to we have detached, which is wholly separate from the main dwelling. So that would be. That's all I can say about that one. So there we go. With the proposed changes for attached ADUs, the state mandated that there not be a size limitation, number of bedrooms allowed, and also they mandated that we could not require more than one additional parking space. So in the proposed draft that was provided to you in your packet, those were the major changes in the wording and in the text. Also, the text did separate out the attached versus the detached language, so that it can be more clear to people that are reading through it. In detached, all the requirements have stayed the same. So nothing has really changed. It pretty much looks exactly what our current or ADU ordinance looks like now. It just is detached regulations. So we are requiring a 12,000 square foot lot, a maximum size of 1,000 square feet or 40% of the main dwelling, whichever is less. No more than 2 bedrooms. And this one we are still keeping at 2 additional off-street parking spaces. One thing I forgot to mention, we did change. We are changing the approval process. The state mandated that internal/attached ADUs are a permitted use in the city or in cities. So anybody is allowed to do it by right. However, they did caveat that by saying that cities can require a permit. So for example, an example we have here in the city is, so in the manufacturing district, for example, if you were to want to build a new manufacturing building, that doesn't have to go before the planning commission. That goes through what's called a site plan review, where it gets reviewed through the various public works departments, fire, the police, all that, and it just gets an administrative staff level approval saying, okay, it meets the code, you can go ahead and apply for a building permit. This will be doing the exact same thing for attached and detached ADUs. That's what we're requesting to change here. So another thing I wanted to touch on was during the application process, if this gets approved, we will be requiring an additional affidavit. We have one right now that requires the property owner sign that they will be living in either the main or the accessory dwelling unit. We don't care which one, just has to live in one of them. This will be another affidavit stating that they will not be operating their accessory dwelling unit as a short-term rental. We are working on a short-term rental ordinance at this time. So I provided what the occurrences are if you're caught operating a short-term rental without a short-term rental license, because they would be applied to those same fines if you were caught with that. So first occurrence is 500, second is 750. The third is an additional 750, and you're not allowed to apply for a short-term rental license for 2 years. And then for the fourth time, any additional occurrence is a Class B misdemeanor with up to $1,000 fine.
These fines are all not lien related, though, correct?
These ones are not lien related. That's correct. So this is just wholly applying to short-term rentals if they're caught doing that. If they're caught with an accessory dwelling unit that hadn't been approved, the city can take lien action on a property. So the accessory dwelling unit permit itself, we're asking them to provide us with what type of ADU they're going to be using, owner information, site plans, floor plans. Like I mentioned before, the 2 types of affidavits. And then we are requesting that this be an administrative level approval. That way it helps kind of take out some of the red tape before going before the planning commission, things like that. Doesn't change the regulations. They would still have to apply by all the same regulations, just not before a public meeting and have to go through the public hearing or public meeting process. So with that, nope, not yet, just kidding. So in your staff report, I included 4 findings that supports these changes. The first one being that Objective 9 of the Land Use and Urban Design element, that we provide a mix of housing options. This would support that by allowing people to create and operate an accessory dwelling unit. And I believe with our code updates will mean that they're not using them as short-term rentals and actually providing housing stock as opposed to just generating income. Second is Objective 11 of the Land Use and Urban Design element. So reinvestment in deteriorating properties. I think that giving an incentive for people, making it easier for them to do this, will help them to reinvest in their property and can increase equity on your property as well. Third is under neighborhood and housing element, Objective 3, encouraging options for a variety of age. I didn't touch on this, but if you'll remember back to the Fashion Place West and the life cycle housing, ADUs are a really great way to do life cycle housing. You have a young family live in a house while they rent out the ADU, and then as it ages, their children age, can move into that ADU, and then they go off to college or come back, and then they move into the main dwelling, and the parents can move into the ADU. There's a great opportunity for life cycle housing there. And last is moderate income housing. So this does provide can provide an opportunity for cheaper housing throughout the valley, increasing that supply. So we are making a recommendation that you forward a recommendation of approval to the City Council for the changes to Chapter 17.78 accessory dwelling units. Any questions I can answer at the moment? I just talked your ear off really fast.
It was just such a good presentation.
Thank you.
Can I go through the red line?
Yeah.
Oh, please. I love it.
This is
That's exactly
it's
what-
code. This is where I ask too many questions.
Please do so.
Okay, I'm just referencing red line copy only so that
Sure.
we know. So on page 3, What is the thought behind detached accessory dwellings and limiting the bedrooms? Why are we considering limiting the bedrooms versus an attached where it doesn't matter?
Do you mean detached?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Sorry.
Yes, thank you for clarifying.
So what staff has been looking at changes to accessory dwelling units for quite some time. And to make this as clear and as easily digestible as possible, we decided to not make any changes to anything that's not state mandated. So at this time, the detached, we decided to leave all those same regulations in place because the state did not mandate anything for detached accessory dwelling units. They allow cities to still kind of operate those as they will. So that's why we have still left it at 2 bedrooms, because that's what the previous code allowed.
Okay, I'm still on this same topic. Sure. The parking, I just don't understand the rationale in having 2 off-street versus 1 off-street and why it would be different there. And I understand your answer is going to be because state code doesn't say that.
Exactly.
But is there more rationale really behind that than just state code? Okay.
Nope, none at all.
Okay.
We wanted to make sure that it was clear what we're doing is state mandated and not what our hopes and dreams are for ADUs.
Okay, so let's say I'm doing an attached, this is a little off. Say I'm doing an attached. I have a standard 2-car garage with a standard 20-foot driveway. My 2 garage parking spots count as the home, and then I can say that 1 spot on my driveway. I don't need an extra wide driveway. I don't need any additional room for parking. I'm going to qualify for an attached ADU with that standard.
To date, that's what we have done for all accessory dwelling units, yes.
Okay. Okay, on page 4, it's talking about 17.78.050. We say that we're no longer going to, upon sale of the property, the new owner shall be required to sign and record a new affidavit to reauthorize the ADU. What's the rationale behind no longer requiring that?
We never did it in the first place.
Is that simply because somebody didn't sell their property and come in, or
it's never been tracked? We've never tracked it. We've never verified. So I think when I first started working here, I went through the accessory dwelling units and checked for affidavits, and there had been a number of them that have changed ownership, but hadn't gone through that reauthorization process. Being recorded against the property already, the affidavit being recorded against the property is included in your mortgage document, so they should be aware that the ADU is there.
Right, Discovery will expose that.
Yeah. But
I could still just not bother to do anything with it and sneak under the radar.
Well, I mean, it would still, in all fairness, still be legal. It would still be an operating ADU. It would have received, at that time, planning commission approval. So I don't think it's really flying under the radar per se. It would just be operating.
It could stop me from coming in and getting a permit and being a licensed purveyor of ADUs.
Yes.
Well, to add to that discussion, the person that bought the house, the ones that you went through, the people that bought the house may not be operating an ADU any longer.
That's
so we're
true,
not
too.
Sure what they're doing. But then also, how often do these permits need to be
That's a one and done.
One and done, yeah. It runs with the conditional uses, run with the land.
But we do the business licensing for rental units. So yearly, you're going to have a review of this exact situation. So what you're talking about flying under the radar would be you stopping your business license.
Well, or just being a new property owner that comes in and just operates an ADU without ever having a business license associated with it.
That's true.
But there's a process for reprimanding or correcting if you're operating without a business license. And there's no longer a conditional use permit.
Correct.
So it's no longer with the life of the house.
Well, yes and no. So they still have that. They still have their conditional use permit. That's a bunch of legalese that I don't understand. I think it doesn't necessarily disappear, but they will still have to follow either the conditions that were outlined in the conditional use permit, or they have to, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jared and/or Bryant, but I think they would have to apply for a new administrative permit, an attached ADU permit, or yeah, what have you.
When they went to apply for the business license.
I think that's right. And can I point one more thing
Please.
out? I think one other thing to kind of maybe focus on with this particular situation and the state code that we are trying to respond to is that the state code, like Zach said, permits us, it leaves us leeway to say we still want some kind of permit on this ADU, even though we're not going to take it through the public venue. And that's what we've elected to do. But the state code doesn't, when saying it's a permitted use, it could have said we could be treating it like we treat Hannah's sewing supply in whatever zone, and you're just allowed to do it. And you don't need anything from us, but we would require a rental license. And the only thing there would be a business license.
Yeah.
We have one other layer still that would be tracking.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yep, it does. That's it.
Okay.
I had more, but they got answered. So
Okay, perfect.
Okay, any other questions for staff? All right.
Okay.
Then I will open this item up for a public hearing. If there's anyone that would like to speak to this item, you can come up to the podium and state your name and address for the record. Okay. Seeing none. Okay. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and bring it back up to the commission for discussion or a motion.
I'll just make a general comment. Zach, strong work. I like it. I'm glad we're moving forward with it.
Madam Chair, I'll make a motion that we forward a recommendation of approval to the City Council for the request to amend the text of Chapter 17.78 Accessory Dwelling Units in the Murray City Land Use Ordinance as presented in the staff report.
I'll second.
Okay. I have a motion by Commissioner Wilson and a second by Commissioner Malkovich to forward a recommendation of approval to the City Council for the request to amend the text of Chapter 17.78 Accessory Dwelling Units in the Murray City Land Use Ordinance as presented by staff. Any discussion on that motion? Okay, then we can take a vote.
Commissioner Wilson,
Yes.
Commissioner Milkovich,
Yes.
Commissioner Nate,
Yes.
Commissioner Hacker,
Yes.
and Commissioner Patterson.
Yes. Okay. Our last agenda item is a discussion item for land use text amendment of mixed use zones.
Okay. Thanks. And let me start and preface what I want to say tonight by saying that this is a discussion item. So I want you to feel free to jump in whenever you want. I would probably have preferred to be able to do it just around the table in the other room when we're able or something like that. But given the time constraints that we have, and I'll get into those in a second, it was more prudent to do it as a discussion item at the end of the meeting tonight. So what we're going to present to you, or what I'm going to talk with you about tonight, are big ticket concepts for changes that we have drafted as proposals to modify our existing mixed use zones, and there are 3, and to address the issues that the council called out when they placed a moratorium on new applications for rezones to mixed use in other areas of the city. So we've been, as you know, under moratorium since since February, for a while, almost the 6 months now, since February. Moratorium was in place for any new projects in mixed-use zones that were not already vested, and for any requests to rezone property to mixed-use zones in the city. While we looked at issues that came up while the Planning Commission had forwarded several applications to the City Council for rezones that they were concerned about, and they identified some concerns. We met with the council, Melinda and I, and we've been working with staff and reviewing and researching for all these months now, and trying to respond to the council's concerns and issues, and working with Public Works and other departments in the city as well. So again, what I'm going to show you are kind of big ideas about where we're going with mixed use and a little bit of review about how it works currently in the city, just to make sure you're right up to speed with what we're doing currently and how that's going to be affected with these changes. And then make sure that you're all okay with those concepts and ideas before we finish drafts and put it on agendas for you. What we'd like to do, if it's possible, is get it on an agenda for July 15th for the Planning Commission to review those drafts, so that we can hopefully take it to the City Council at the end of July for their committee of the whole discussion, and then have them act on it on August 3rd, one day after the moratorium ends on August 2nd. So that's kind of our time frame. So with that, let me just show you a quick slide and say why mixed use. What are the kinds of things? And this is where I wanted to begin, because as you look at the concepts, remember that these are the kinds of things we're trying to accomplish with mixed use zoning versus some other kind of zone. Mixed use zones are uniquely qualified to revitalize downtowns, to increase private investment, to support good business climates. The business climate and the way that people want to develop, the way that the market side wants to develop property is changing and shifting, and mixed use is the best response in many cases to that. Mixed use developments can increase economic viability in areas. They have lower infrastructure costs. That's a complicated statement, but it is true over time. They have some significant infrastructure costs up front, but over time they're less. They're serving lots more intense development. So it's just math. There's only so much pipe in front of a mixed use development that has commercial elements and 425 residential units, and it's the same distance of pipe that serves 6 single family homes. There's no denying that math. Over time, it's better infrastructure cost, and it creates healthy, more walkable places and more vibrant communities. So basically, where it can be done appropriately, it represents a good sustainable land use pattern that has good benefits for the surrounding areas as well. That brings us to the question of where we do mixed uses. So mixed use zoning and where they're kind of appropriate. And I'm not going to read all of my little subheadings. You can buzz through them if you can get through them before I move to the next slide. I dare you all. We currently do our mixed use zones in three big areas with one outlying existing property up at the Kmart site. But other than that, we essentially have mixed use zoning here around the Murray North track station, the Fire Clay area, the TOD zone. Here at the center of town, the MCCD, Murray City Center District is a mixed use zone. And then all of this lighter orange is the MU zone, the mixed use zone itself. And you can see that up here as well in Zach's graphic that he did for us. My finger doesn't work. Right there, the Kmart site that we rezoned to mixed use as well. And that rezone, in a way, started the ball rolling for people to be looking at other areas of the city, which led to those applications that the Planning Commission reviewed and forwarded to the council, that the council had some questions about. So let me, from that, we just talked about those existing mixed uses, so I'm not going to bother with anything on this slide except for this one statement. The mixed use zone that we have, this has been a matter of some confusion for some time. It's a mixed use zone, and it's called the mixed use zone. So it's kind of the Madonna of our zones, and we're proposing to, in this change, to rename it the Murray Central Mixed Use Zone, because it is, in fact, associated with, it exists because of that Murray Central station. And all of the places that we applied it up until that Kmart site application had been around that station, or at least in the areas that fed into that station that we felt like as a city in 2010 or whenever it was that it was rezoned, that these areas could benefit by mixed use zoning around the Murray Central station. So we want to rezone it or rename it the Murray Central Mixed Use, so MCMU. And I'm eliminating hyphens from everything as I go as much as possible. So it's just MCMU. Mostly because of selfish reasons. If you've ever typed a staff report and you've had to type CD zoning for the 15th time, it gets really annoying. So, and they serve no purpose. So they're going away as much as they can. The TOD zone, again, in Fire Clay area, the only change really, in addition to some changes with parking and a slight change in density, the only real change in the TOD zone that we felt was necessary was that the Planning Commission has never traditionally, they've never reviewed any projects in the TOD zone. There are not many left to do, but as properties redevelop in that area still, the few that are left to do, we'd like the Planning Commission to review those mixed use developments the way that you do in all the other zones.
Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what lessons have you learned from the development that has gone on in Fire Clay? There has to be some take-homes, right? Clearly, ground floor commercial has not gained traction. I think ultimately it will, but it hasn't. Mm-hmm. What additional lessons have you learned? That's
a great question. One of the things that came out of Fire Clay that we see in Fire Clay is that the activity level is there, like you said, but not quite we're not to that threshold of mass yet to have it support the commercial as well as it could. The other thing that comes out of Fire Clay that we learn is that the tracks themselves, we develop these properties around the tracks, and yet the tracks themselves represent a significant barrier to pedestrian activity. So there is a limit, a threshold to where you get that benefit, that walkability benefit. That's a lesson that comes out of there.
Wait, so can you explain that to me? So,
Yeah.
wait, or say it one more time. You said the threshold hasn't met the need for the commercial, meaning we don't have enough residents in the
How
building
many
yet?
people are there? And Fireclay actually too, the other thing that we look at in Fireclay is that it is a fairly isolated area. State Street gets a lot of traffic, but you don't know that it's there from State Street. The Mill Creek side is responding to State Street a little more, and that'll pull that area in. But it's mainly focused on Main Street here, and that doesn't go anywhere on two different ends. So you don't have as much traffic in and out of the area. It's isolated in that way. That's why it was an
It's
industrial
hard
area.
to get to it.
Yeah, it's not. You have to mean it.
Yeah.
And mixed use requires a little bit of a natural draw of people, and there's not as much of that in Fireclay as you would guess because the station's there.
Is that because, I mean, is there intent for that to change for Main Street, the through traffic to improve with?
Mill Creek's doing mixed use development on their side. There'll be more units there. When we get to a threshold of numbers of residents, then that can support a few small businesses on its own.
Yeah.
So far, most of the businesses in Fireclay have been office uses of some kind on lower floors. So,
But
it
the
hasn't contributed
connectivity
much.
on the south side, it is 45th, right? It just dead ends into 45th.
Right.
Like
It
there's
just-
no way to add any connectivity to
Right.
that.
You
part
don't
of
go
it,
any
right?
further. It's an
Yeah.
isolated area. In fact, we built a bridge and an aqueduct when they were developing Fireclay because of the issues of isolation there. So I think that's one of the takeaways from it is that we would expect, I would expect at least as good in any other district that we have as Fireclay. And we have some really great things happening in Fireclay that aren't quite as good as we'd like them, but they're on their way, and the architecture is nice. The site is nice. It's nice to walk around within Fireclay itself, very walkable in its little area of its own. Yeah, so I think that's what I would take away from it. Now, what about you?
Well, I mean, I think that it is. I'm going to quote Brad McElrath here. It is still a teenager. There's a lot of growth yet to happen in and around there. I think Mill Creek is really starting to develop pretty significant projects along Main Street there. Main Street itself is in horrific disrepair and needs to be completely redone. And I think that's another thing that will add to it. But my biggest criticism is simply there hasn't activated that street level activity. I mean, other than the couple of crosswalks to get to the city market or whatever it's called. And that's about the only place I almost run over people. And, I hope with time that it does grow out. I think that State Street, as long as projects develop, hopefully closer towards State Street, or maybe it's just going to remain a big RV lot for time and all eternity. And at some point in time, I would like to think that the land pressures there will support additional projects in there. But
That's probably a ways out.
State Street is a good commercial corridor, and I think it's going to stay that way.
Fireclay is going to get through teenage years, but maybe not get to prom during teenage years. It'll be after.
I can relate.
We'll have lifetime friends, but during college, it'll be okay.
So when you say it hasn't met the threshold, do you have like a standard of what
I don't. I just know we're not there because we're not seeing the activity in those lower units are there and they're available. There's going to be a few more in the Metro South project. There's some space on Main Street that's, I believe, being looked at for a local gym, some things like that. We have some. There's going to be good things happen there. It's just going to take a little more time.
So I guess, can you explain to me especially like in the MCCD zone, probably more than anywhere else, but is the idea of mixed use that the residents alone, by putting residents and commercial together, there's enough people, there's a threshold of people that can sustain that business? Or is it that there's enough people, but to sustain that business, you would need people from around the city to want to go to those places as well, which is the problem we're running into? Because I mean, that's always been my understanding about the MCCD, right? Is it's like, we'll bring in this influx of people because we have, whatever, a certain amount of housing there, but it wouldn't maybe sustain itself without the rest of Murray going to those restaurants or those spas or those whatever.
That's very accurate, except that there are different kinds of, there's mixed use, but there are different kinds of mixed use. And some of them function very much that way, but all of them have that same principle in mind, that anything you can do to keep people in a certain place is good for that area. So the idea with downtown revitalization, and one of the things I said I wasn't going to go through these little bullets, but I'm going to. One of the points, the clear purpose of the zoning for the MCCD is revitalization of the downtown. When there are businesses that are active in the downtown on State Street, great. And then nighttime comes and it's a ghost town. But
Except for Ice House. Ice House is booming.
Ice House, Desert Star, there are kinds of businesses that stay active, and you want those in your downtowns. And they're great. But if there's not people during the day, you need employment centers for people to be there during the day. You need the traffic coming in and out of the city, and you need residents to keep it lively all the time when those businesses would normally not have anybody there. That's the idea, is that it's a vibrant place all the time. You got something on your mind? Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
So I promise I won't say anything that I'm not supposed to say. So the TV turned off. That's weird. Can you guys still see?
No, we have blank screens too.
Powerless.
Wait, maybe.
Did you do the clapper?
It worked. Hey, it worked. So I just wanted to just say, so when he says threshold, there's a term in real estate that it's like households or rooftops create commercial or something like that. I don't remember what it's called.
Rooftop spring retail.
Yeah, rooftop spring retail. But me personally, and through my experience of things, my opinion is that through no fault of its own, because it was a brand new zone, the TOD zone was new for its time, it was very innovative at its time. There wasn't a focus on the retail, and they didn't focus on making sure that retail was being brought in by, holding developers. Some of these developments had developer agreements that I think should have had requirements for retail to come in. So I think that threshold, what he's saying, the threshold is there, the rooftops are there, but you don't have the businesses because it's not immediately adjacent to State Street. It's not immediate. You can't see it from 4500 South.
So everyone always points to the TOD as like the major downfall of any mixed use zone. You hear it in all the comments. This is, even when we were talking about Bullion, and everyone's like, oh, it's failed in all these other places, and it's not comparable, but they all like to point to that specific place, how even when we were talking about Vine Street, somebody made the comment that
Still open stores.
there's empty stores, everywhere. And I think that is a big place that they're talking about. So I guess, how do you sell the difference?
Well, and that's my concern also all along. If we're behind in the curve in development, for example, like Holiday developed first, so they got all the good businesses. Now they're taken.
The good businesses want to be in the good places, right? Like it'll come, but like how do we? I don't understand how, or how we message the difference, I guess.
Well, like all due respect, and I say this a little bit tongue in cheek because I have a good close friend who's antique dealer, but how do we get the hot top draw restaurant to be there versus 4 antique stores?
Well, I'll tell you the only thing that I do know, and this is just from talking to retailers and developers and knowing who will come and who won't. You can't get them without people anymore, period. Because the rooftop spring retail has been their mantra for 15 years. So it's time. You don't get them without the rooftops anymore. And I can't say which ones are interested, but only if these kind of things happen, because that's all still under wraps with different developers and landlords, et cetera. But there are plenty of them, and you know their names. They don't come unless you don't get them. So for example, they're talking about FireClay and saying those units are empty underneath those buildings. Mm-hmm. There are empty units all over State Street with nary an apartment above them. It's not, the old method is not bringing in new retailers.
Yeah.
So it's just not doing it. Shopco closed on old retail's watch, on the way that old zoning handled things watch. Kmart closed on old retail's watch. It's not how it works anymore.
So also kind of what you're saying is if we hadn't put apartments there, it would just be a ghost town of empty shops. So now it's empty shops, but at least there's people living there.
Well, it would still be an industrial wasteland.
It would be an industrial wasteland,
if we hadn't put anything there. So FireClay gets touted as this problem. Well, we look at FireClay and that's a failure. It is absolutely not a failure.
I agree.
Most of the units that went
I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying.
No, I know. I'm responding to that comment. And I think I have live a couple of times. I'll probably get in trouble for doing it again, but I'll do it again anyway. FireClay is not a failure. None of those first projects that went in were required to do any retail at all. Like Zach said, the original until 2015, Brad and I rewrote some of the code to say new projects, at least on Main Street and Burkill, have to do some commercial, because they weren't doing any at all because of the things Zach cited. You can't see it from State Street, you can't see it from 45th, and it's got to survive on its own little area. And like you were saying, you really need, for a really good mixed use area, you need more than just the people that live there, because you're not going to have, there aren't 14 or 15 or 18 floors above it. So you have to have some from outside too. We do a little different mixed use here in the West than you have that developed on its own in Brooklyn. That's not what we're doing. So we have different kinds, and there are different ways that it responds, and we have some of those things to talk about in the slides, why mixed use does work and doesn't work, and how it's different. And one of the reasons that we had to propose new zones, as opposed to just laying the mixed use zone that we have somewhere else, or adding MCCD, expanding it or something, is because the mixed use that's going to happen on 9th East, like we talked about when some of those zone change proposals came through, is going to be significantly different than what we've seen so far. And we need to be able to respond to that.
Did we swing that pendulum too far in requiring commercial in Fireclay?
Well, I don't think so, because we did primary only. I just think, and it's only Burkill and Main Street, and most of Burkill and Main Street were already developed. Murray, what's it called? Murray Depot has some commercial on Burkill and Fireclay. Not too much, it's not bad, and they're looking at coffee shops and things because they're right adjacent to, I mean, they're walking across the street to the platform.
So, okay, this maybe is not a good question either, but I know that there's a, affordable housing. Everyone's looking for a place to live.
Mm-hmm.
Is Fireclay like full? Like is everyone, all the apartments are full there?
There are waiting lists for Murray, I don't know about Murray Depot, but Murray, they're all called Murray.
Awesome.
The Metro. There are waiting lists for the Metro North. My daughter's on one of them, trying to get in the Metro. There are waiting lists for some of those. They fill up. And the Avita apartments and those, the first ones built, they're all usually full. Vacant, but that's not unique. The vacancy rate in the Valley is less than 4%. So there's not much vacant anywhere you get it. But yeah, Fireclay is pretty full. And it probably contributes to affordability overall. There's all of these kind of projects that we do, they may not be individually affordable as you look at the unit itself and what it costs to rent it, but the supply being increased increases the affordability of housing in the state. If that's all we can do, then we do it. Let me talk to you about where we want to implement new zones a little bit. This is the small area plans map from the general plan, if you recognize that. There are a couple of maps in the general plan that call out different nodes and parts of the city where we should expect change and try to plan for it. So city retail centers, regional centers, you can see 9th East here. Around this would be Macy's, and what's on the other side of the street from Macy's? EOS now at 9th East. Here at 59th, you have the 7-Eleven, et cetera. There's some shops around here. Sue's Place is here, right? I'm right on the right spot.
My house is right there.
That's right. There you go. Yep. Travis's house, right, almost within that green bubble. Mm-hmm. These are areas of change. Larger ones, the regional centers that were identified, the BRT station villages along State Street that will come, and obviously our front runner and track stations. All identified as areas where we should expect change. We're trying to use those as we talk about new zones, and we're proposing 2. Don't make fun of the names, it's all I've got. Village mixed use is the lighter of the 2. That would be more appropriate, for example, in areas like 9th East and around 4800 South, where there's maybe not as much transit possibilities, but maybe bigger. It's just a suggestion. And the centers mixed use. So more appropriate maybe in the larger regional centers, et cetera. And they are slightly different. They are very much the same, but there are slight differences. Now, this mapping, the general plan is what we wanted to base where we would want to apply those zones. But then again, the language that we're proposing in the code would say things like along important transit corridors and in and around those areas identified in the 2017 general plan, only on projects or properties that were at least 3 acres or the amalgamation of 3 acres.
Can I ask about that? Is there a reason why we would? So it's easy to amass large pieces of property, or maybe it's not. It's really hard to do small scale mixed use, and we've made it hard to do. Mm-hmm. Should we make it easier for people to be able to come in and build a project on 5,000 square feet, an apartment building with ground floor retail? Should we consider things like that. You know, if we go back east, that's how it happened 100 years ago. It was whatever piece of property you amassed, you built your project. You couldn't build these mega projects.
Right.
Should we be considering that in some of these areas?
There's a good argument to be made that that would be great, that would be more organic development, that it would weather time better. The other argument, I guess the concern I have with that is just being able to get that through the public process. To get every single gas station that's on less than half an acre wants to keep his gas station but throw 2 apartment units over it. I don't know that I necessarily have a problem with it, but I don't think the community is ready for it yet, if I'm being perfectly honest. So the 3-acre projects, getting those sites together. The other thing that it does let you do, the other concern that it would have would be open space and amenities provided for it. We don't have a mechanism to provide sort of public infrastructure open space for those kind of developments. So if it's left up to the individuals, the 5,000 square foot lot can't do it. He has to depend on public open space and infrastructure that we don't provide well yet. So that's a more holistic approach that I couldn't write in 6 months. I'd need a couple of years to get my head around how to do that well.
Okay, start doing it.
But yeah, we'll start on that.
Okay.
You're speaking the language. We've had this conversation about organic versus forcing the larger developments. And where we came down was the larger amalgamations of properties, just for ease of meeting the other kinds of requirements that make them good mixed use places. When Murray has, maybe let's say that when it has that base of mixed use, we do mixed use over the next 15 years or 10 years or whatever it is, and we have good 3-acre projects, and they've provided infrastructure, and you'll see here in some of the code that we've proposed that adding public accessibility to that infrastructure gets you points, it gets you extra density, it gets you whatever. So when they've done those kind of things and there's some public availability to their infrastructure, then yeah, we can say the remainder of the properties that haven't redeveloped, great, go for it. We can do little or more organic projects in between. If that makes sense?
Yep.
For us that are just learning, as you teach us, can you give examples of public?
Not from around here. I can't actually. I'm talking about parks and things like that, accessibility to parks, and there's places where
like bus stops or.
Well, no, they'd be more like public parks. Public parks and more public transit. We don't have great public transportation yet, so where we do these things, we need to have access to different kinds of public infrastructure that we have some of, but we don't have enough, I don't think, to let everybody just do whatever they want.
So it's not quite up to developers yet. I mean, if we had more trail systems, for example, if you were built on the trail system, then you would get points.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say we're doing the right things now that would support letting people do smaller scale projects more organically later on. We're doing that now, or we're proposing that now anyway.
Have you seen any of those requested here, Jared?
On small ones?
Or are they not requested because they don't meet the ordinances?
Well, we haven't had these ordinances yet. I mean, we've only had the mixed use zone, et cetera. And we've had projects that come in on an acre or 2. We've had 2 and 3 acre projects. We've even had requests for less than that. But we're only saying, and this is important, this is only where we're talking about instituting these 2 new zones. So in new areas, up around Macy's, for example, or at the R.C. Willey site, for example. So individual property owners who own homes in those areas and want to rezone their single family home from R18 to mixed use, that's not something I think we're ready to do as a city. I just don't think we're there. I don't think we have the mindset for it. We don't have the build out for it. When you're doing those kind of developments in a town that has existed since 17 whatever in Patterson, New Jersey or something, you can do it. It works there. They have the social infrastructure and the open space infrastructure and the retail infrastructure that's small scale to support those that are really small and can't bring it on their own. But we have to build that first. We have to build the bones first. We don't have them yet. I don't think anybody does in the city or in the valley, so we'll see where that goes.
Was the R.C. Willey's project and the sports mall project put on hold, or they?
They were withdrawn.
Right?
They withdrew their applications pending the moratorium's outcome to see what came out of it.
Okay.
Can you go back to that last map, Jared? So 53 and 5300 South in the state, I guess it's BRT Station Village. Does that include the whole
mixed
use area that was requested there as well?
I would say that the BRT Station Village being there, that was the argument that we used from the general plan when they asked for the rezone to just mixed use zoning. We supported it as staff by saying it's where a station village goes, and that tells us we're supposed to think outside of the normal future land use map for it. So I'd say, that would qualify it for maybe centers mixed use, what we're writing.
Centers. The centers is bigger than village.
Yep, yeah. That's the problem with centers and village. I'm using two words from this mapping that we've identified that we've used crossing both kinds. So I don't have other words that are better though yet, but I'm working on it.
So in theory, green spots are potential village and blue spots are potential city.
Centers, except for the villages, except for these green spots that are labeled village.
Those are BRT.
Those would be BRT stations. I would anticipate those might support center mixed use. But again, each one would have to be interviewed. Each one would have to be viewed individually, and not by just where it is and what's on that map, but by asking yourselves if they've got 3 acres or more, because we're not talking about a project that's being applied for in the mixed use zone already or in the MCCD. Those could be 1 acre projects or even smaller. We don't have that restriction there. This is someone's coming in and saying, I don't want to be CD zoning anymore. I want to be a mixed use zone. And we don't want to do that. We're saying we should look at 3 acres or more, be on one of those nodes or on the transit corridors, be currently being used non-residentially, be a failing or a lagging commercial property, be a vacant commercial property, something like that, that we're meeting some of these other deals. Find that the development of the property under mixed use zoning will meet at least 5 of these goals. We have 8 goals written here. That the project, that rezoning, the purpose of the goal is to say, if we rezone this to mixed use instead of what it is, will it meet 5 of these kinds of conditions? Will it result in high quality redevelopment of commercial property? Would it retain or rehabilitate the commercial use of a significant portion of that property? Would it increase local access to commercial services for in-project residents and surrounding neighborhoods? Again, that's that question of what kind of mixed use are we talking about? Is it going to be self-supportive? Probably not, because you're not going to put 20,000 units in a square mile, but you do have access to a lot more residential than just is going to go on the project, but you've got to connect to it and provide ways for them to get to it too. Can it do that? Can it promote a greater variety of housing options in Murray neighborhoods? Can it promote opportunities for life cycle housing or moderate income? Can it provide increased walkability and connections, walkable connections to surrounding neighborhoods? Can it create a sense of place and community? We heard that a lot from council members. And can it result in improved conditions for buffering and transitions to residential uses? The other consideration that we heard a lot about was that these areas where we're talking about inherently bump up against single family zoning and large stable residential neighborhoods a lot more than the areas where we've been doing it currently in old industrial areas like Fire Clay and down in the mixed use gully. I don't know what to call it other than the gully.
The gully.
Commerce Drive in that area. So you don't bump up against a lot of residential in those areas. But we will when we're rezoning on 9th East. So we want to take that into consideration.
Can I ask you, since you're back, since you just talked about the gully.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of back streets in there that back up against the tracks lines and are really removed from the Commerce Drive and some of those areas. Yeah. Are you still supportive of having those as mixed use properties where their walkability is questionable, the viability of businesses in them are questionable, at least commercial type businesses?
Yeah, that is exactly the right question. And we've been asking ourselves that since before the moratorium, actually. And the answer is yes and no. And a couple of the things that we're proposing for as changes to the mixed use zone, in addition to calling it the Murray Center mixed use. So I'm going to start calling it, from now on tonight, I'm going to call it the MCMU instead, to try to get you all used to it. A couple of the changes that we're proposing with that zone deal directly with that question. So I guess the answer is we'll get to them in just a second if it's okay. Is that all right?
If I'd shut up, yeah, you can get to them.
But it's exactly the right question. And it might even be the next. No, it's not the next slide, but it's like within 2. You're getting there. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the development process and make sure that's still clearly understood. In the proposed zones, in the CMU, where centers mixed use, and the VMU, village mixed use zones, any new mixed use development and redevelopment of properties would first require zone changes, so that you'd have to ask for the rezone, and we'd ask ourselves those questions that we just talked about. Does it meet these kinds of things? And if it does, let's say yes. And if it doesn't, for whatever reason, let's say no.
Future land use map?
Yeah, the future land use map would need to be changed too, but if it can.
But only by application. You're not going to, next iteration, you don't see us.
Actually, in the next iteration of the general plan, I would support making the change to the general plan at that time.
Okay.
And saying we're going to take the areas that we identified as the general areas where this would happen and put them in the mixed use future land use category. So that's not a question anymore. So that's at least out of the way first.
And when would that
things
be?
Could still be considered. Because remember that a zone change is always optional. It's not the map's decision. It's still the city's decision. You can have the map telling you to do it and have other reasons that you want to say no and say no. As long as you're calling out the reasons that you want to say no or yes, you're okay, regardless of what that map says. And kind of what I wanted to give you here were guideposts to say, to kind of guide the discussion about whether it was appropriate or not, in addition to the mapping. So. And in a way, already, this isn't the future land use map, but it is a map in the general plan. And the future land use map, a lot of these village nodes and city center nodes, community nodes and village nodes, they show up on the actual future land use map. But they're labeled village nodes and community nodes, so it's even more confusing heading. And they don't exactly correspond to all of them, but most of them are there. So it's pretty much supported by the general plan already. Changing the future land use map would just be a way of saying, yes, we're ready to take that step that we weren't quite ready to take in 2017.
Jerry, can I ask you a quick question? So our auto lane down State Street, from what you're saying, I could see in the future potentially we could have mixed use and you have car dealer downstairs? Because that's a 3-acre section of land with commercial that has nothing.
You're not going to see car dealerships in any of the mixed use zones as permitted or conditional uses. So if an area were rezoned to mixed use from one of the car dealerships, as like the car dealer property wanted to rezone to mixed use, they would have to be ready to not be a car dealer anymore.
Can we rezone Garco?
Not on the record.
It's funny you would ask that. That question's been asked, not by us, by potential buyers. So cross your fingers. That's not on the record. Well, Jamie, strike that from the minutes. So let me, sorry.
Okay.
I'll say something else I shouldn't if I don't move on. CMU and VMU, they would all be mixed use developments. They'd have to get rezoned first, but if the Planning Commission and the City Council rezoned them to one of those two zones, they would all require what's called master site plan review and approval by the Planning Commission because they should all be on 3 acres. And the way we've written it was to assume that they would be and say new development in these zones requires master site plan approval. So nothing happens in these zones without going through that whole master site plan approval. We'll talk about that as a refresher in just a minute. And there's a reason for that, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the master site plan approval. The existing zones, not a lot changes for them except that in the MCCD zone, we still require a review by that design review committee before it comes to you, because that is our most unique of the mixed use zones, being the downtown zone. And then any subsequent design review approval by the Planning Commission, but you might be doing just design review approval. For example, if it's not a 3-acre site that needs a master site plan, or it's not a horizontal mixed use site that needs a master site plan, then it's just design review approval, but it's still by you guys, not us as staff. So those might come to you, and they might be an acre or an acre and a half. There's some smaller properties there. The TOD zone, like I said, has never had a requirement for the Planning Commission review. We'd like you guys to review those, whether it's master site plan because it's 3 acres, which it won't be anymore in that zone, or if it's just design review approval. The mixed use zone that's now being proposed as the MCMU would go through the exact same process, both of these two zones, TOD and MCMU, though without that design review committee approval, because that only exists for the MCCD. I know that was a confusing thing for the City Council when I reviewed these slides on Tuesday, so let me make that clear. It's just that MCCD design review committee is still just for the MCCD zone, not for the others. And then anything that's horizontal mixed use or development up to 3 acres would require that master site plan approval. Now, that master site plan, just as a refresher, we're not proposing any changes to this because we think it worked pretty well with the plans that came through for Kmart, although we have made some tweaks and adjustments. But we still want master site plan approval to have these required components: building orientation to private streets, not parking lots; central features to unify the commercial and residential; buildings to be arranged to form outdoor spaces that link pedestrian walkways. And then again, that gets approved in conjunction, that whole master site plan gets approved in conjunction with a master site plan approval, or master site plan agreement, that we used to call the memorandum of understanding. There's a need to change that term. So we're calling it master site plan agreement, like a development agreement, but titled slightly differently. Now, one of the things that we're asking for is, we didn't have any standards for that when we rewrote that part of the code and made those changes to the MCCD and the MU zone in 2019. We just said you have to do this memorandum of understanding. You have to tell us how you're going to do things, and we'll memorialize it with this. But we didn't have any real sort of framework for how you did that. So we're asking them, after the experiences that we've had and the requests that we've had, to provide certain things no matter what. First, no matter what the size of the project is, if it's going through master site plan and getting an agreement, then it needs a traffic impact study. It also needs a parking analysis. We want that for reference because we have a lot of different opinions and professionally and otherwise about parking. And we want a parking analysis on each project so we can verify that what we're requiring is within the ballpark. And third, that there be an adequate public utilities and facilities review performed with the Public Works Department before the project comes full circle. And then we may require a public services review. That could be police or fire or parks or even community services like youth services and things like that. We never know what's coming and want to be able to address those things. Go ahead, Lisa.
Do we have parameters to define like traffic impact study? Is that within a half mile of the plotted land or one block or at the corner?
We didn't write that in. I would assume that we'd want the engineer and the planning department, the engineering and planning departments to be able to determine what was needed based on the size of the project. So we want to be able to say to them like we did with Van Winkle, we want your traffic study to go all the way to 7th East on this one side and all the way up to this other intersection on the other, because normally it would just be right there. We don't want just the one intersection reviewed. It's going to have a significant impact. Please take it further. We need kind of the flexibility, I think.
I noticed parks on there. Parks have traditionally not really had much of a say in any of our projects, correct?
Yep.
I like that.
It's more and more important as we deal with mixed uses, especially, and as the city builds out.
I think that's a good direction.
Yeah, I really like that too. I wish we had better definitions of open space and public spaces. So yeah.
Well, we can work on that too. We'll do that. So that's the master site plan. And this is where I wanted to talk about. We can talk about a couple of things that we started to talk about before with what makes mixed use work and when is it not working or what's appropriate with it. Those master site plan considerations are important for a couple of reasons. And I just wanted to show you a couple of pictures to illustrate why. This is a mixed-use development that has both horizontal and vertical components. There's a small coffee shop right there underneath this apartment building in South Jordan. And you have some retail over here, and you have a nice little restaurant right there across the street from this apartment building. And this is just one little section you're seeing. This is a large apartment complex. It's a lot of units. This is a street view of that same corner. So this corner right here. So that's your little restaurant, and that's your mixed use, and you can see the coffee shop underneath the residential there. So the problem with this is that now that coffee shop is, or not, sorry, the coffee shop's still there. Now the cafe is a pharmacy. This is also right by this is at the South Jordan commuter rail station. There's office here, there's tons of retail, there's tons and tons of office, lots of retail and tons of units. And yet that restaurant couldn't make it. Didn't make it with all those people. And I posit that it's for a very specific reason. This is, and we'll get back to that in a second. Adjacency doesn't preclude the mixing of uses, but it should be encouraged to maximize the benefits of mixed use, like reduced parking, reduced vehicle trips, and the miles traveled, and to get people from units like this. Look at all these units, and this is like a tenth of what's really there. This is by the district. So if I could pan out, I could show you how much there really is there. And it fades to a full-on suburban single-family, well, several full-on suburban single-family neighborhoods. And this is Raising Cane's. This is the new Raising Cane's restaurant. And tell me where these people, now they can get there, but there's no
it's all
clear,
auto-centric.
there's no clear way for them to get there. There's no thought given to them at all. And the same with this, there's a Warren's here, there's a restaurant here, this is a 7-Eleven, and I want to tell you that further on down this road, it's better, and they have crosswalks and ways to bring these people that are literally 60 feet from these retail pads to them, but they don't give them any incentive other than just sheer proximity. And if you want to, I think that you could. It would be an easy thing to do. And maybe they will as time goes forward. I would hope so. But look at this in that same way. If you, coming back to this, if you come out of your apartments here, and there are several places where you can come out of the apartments, and the coffee shop's right there, great. If I want to go to this restaurant, they haven't given me a place to cross the street that's clear for me. Now I'm right here, so I'm not stupid. I'm just going to cross the street to the restaurant, and I end up in their drive-through outlet to the road.
Or a patio fence.
Yeah, or a patio fence, exactly, if there's not, or their outdoor dining right there. So there's no incentive for these people to feel like this is part of their neighborhood, their world, their whatever. They're not connected, is my larger point. These uses are adjacent, but they're not connected. And that hurts overall, that overall longevity of the success of that big commuter rail station platform that's right there bringing people in and out too, because the neighborhood itself isn't well connected like it should be. And it's just, and I'll show you what I mean. This is what we did at Van Winkle. So same kind of project. You have exactly the same kind of project. These apartments, because of the master site plan, were forced to consider how they would get people from in here over to their restaurants and pads and things, while still allowing these folks as restaurant owners and pad site owners to have access to all that visibility from the traffic on 9th East, good flow from the main road going in and out for different neighborhoods to come in and out of the project and still support it, but still give these folks a reason to feel like they're part of this neighborhood. When you look out of your 3rd floor window of your apartment here and look down at the the little square they're building and the red tile walkways or whatever, you feel like that's part of your neighborhood. You should be going to that restaurant, right? People are marketable psychological creatures, and we have to do it in site design if we want to get the maximum benefit of mixed use. So that's why we want to do horizontal mixed use with master site plans. And realistically, almost all of the development that we'll see from these village mixed use zones that we might implement and the centers mixed use zones are going to be redevelopment of already commercial properties. So they're going to be horizontal a lot of times in nature. To that end, we have the master site plan agreement. Sorry, I'll move on past this because I've already kind of talked about it, but that master site plan would govern those things just like it always has done, but we've called it out as specifically having to do that. And then it would, these are the required elements for it to control the phasing and the residential densities. It would all be memorialized in that. You guys as the planning commission, because this is an agreement and you don't get to make those, as the planning commission, when you give the master site plan approval, you give it contingent on them going through the rest of that process and getting a master site plan agreement that you've basically fleshed out the components of. Say, make sure that's all in the master site plan agreement and go get it with city council and you're done. But unless we memorialize it, we can't make sure that these commercial things happen. Just back to this real quickly, governing the installation of important critical infrastructure. What we did in the MOU that's now called the master site plan agreement is guarantee that when they built these first units, they would install all of the improvements for this commercial and start installing the improvements, these pedestrian improvements as well, as they get the site plans for these done. And soon you're going to see a site plan for one of those first pad sites, because there's plenty of interest in those. As the apartments come up out of the ground, they'll get better and better calls for tenants. So this feels like it's working well, and we want to keep doing that through the other zones. Development standards. So this is where we talk about parking and density and all these kind of tough things. So buckle up, and if you need a break, this is probably the time. And I'll go as fast as I can and answer your questions, but I want to make sure I answer your questions. Do you need a break, or are you okay?
I'm on the edge of my seat.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. I'll keep going. So this is where we're going to talk about height, density, buffering, commercial requirements, et cetera. And they do get a little different from zone to zone because the zones are unique, and that's what we're trying to respond to. They're not all the same. So commercial requirements. One of the things we had never really done was we allowed live work in mixed uses, but we'd never really defined whether that was okay and how it was okay and what it counted for. Could your whole project be mixed use? Or sorry, could your whole requirement be filled by live work units? We didn't have any real code for that. We're proposing that we change that and that live work units be allowed to fill some of the required commercial that gets calculated for a project, a mixed use project, but not all of it. And the level of it depends on the zone that you're in.
Meaning you can live where you work. So if you own a commercial unit, you can live in it.
Right. If the mixed use, this is a side swipe cutout of a live work unit. It's actually got some just straight up residential units above it, but the living space is above the workspace down below. So we have to have standards for that. We never had them. So now we're calling them out in the code and saying, you have to build a 12 to 15 foot first floor for that. If your parking for that is private in the back, you don't get to count that for the live work units commercial parking because it's your parking and your stuff's in the garage, et cetera. So you park it just like it's a commercial unit.
Would you park it as a standard commercial unit, or would you say that, this is where on-street parking really is supported in this setting?
It is where on-street parking is supported, but we would use it in the overall calculation. Now, you might not have to provide that parking right there for it other than on-street, but we'd still clock you for half a unit or whatever it is in the overall. We calculate your overall commercial square footage because we're counting it for you in your commercial parking requirement. So that's what I mean by that it has to be required. Okay. But yeah, these are only viable where there's on-street parking. Yes. Buy them, or where they're in the middle of a big bunch of units that doesn't need it.
Which of the three potential mixed-use zones are we talking about now? All three?
Both of the new potentials and all three of the old zones. Okay. These would be the same kind of allowance. Live work works in those, but it doesn't get to count for your full requirement. And each one of them has a different threshold for how much it gets to do. 10% in the MCCD, but I think I'm just going to give you the examples that I can remember. 10% in the MCCD, but 30% in the mixed use, the MCMU West district. And we didn't talk about that. I should go back a slide. I've missed an important
Village
thing.
and Center.
Let me go back a couple of slides, as long as we're talking about that. The MCMU, one of the things that we proposed in that MCMU zone is that it be divided into two sub-districts, east and west. So it's one zone. Nobody has to get rezoned when this is all over in August. But there are, as a result of this code change, either in the west district or in the east district. And the requirements for parking and the allowances for density and whether or not you get to reduce your overall commercial, et cetera, are dependent on whether you're in the east or the west, because in the east, you're much more directly adjacent to that usable mixed-use area of the train station. You have some constraints, but not nearly the constraints that you do on the west side on Commerce. And some of those little side streets you mentioned, Travis, and we're going to talk about those in just a second. So the MCMU West subdistrict would be different. And one of the ways that it would be different is in how much of that commercial requirement gets to be filled by saying, well, I got these live work units. Well, that's great. In the MCMU West, maybe that makes sense. Maybe that's the best you can do along some of your interior streets because you don't have great frontage for other things. But in the MCCD in our downtown, you're on State Street, you're on 48th, you're on Vine. Maybe 10% is more than enough. So that's that. The other couple of questions are these are just reminders that commercial uses are required for every mixed use project. And I bring this up because in doing my research on this, I was surprised to find how many cities do not require commercial components as part of their mixed-use projects. They look at their areas as more mixed-use areas and not mixed-use projects. They do them all as, well, this developer's coming in and building a big project and we're doing a development agreement to zone for it. And that zone is going to require that, it's going to allow them to build this many units and then they're going to bring in this many users for this outer rim of pad sites. And they control it all through a development agreement. But there's no code set number or percentage, or you have to have it on a private street or a public street. You see that sometimes. You have to have commercial on the public street, and then you can do your residential behind or above. But that's about it. We require it in all of our mixed-use zones. We don't do mixed-use residential zoning. This is a mixed-use, true mixed-use zone, all 5 of the ones that we're proposing to keep on the books and add to the books. They're all true mixed-use commercial zones. We are, though, proposing some reductions in the commercial by way of looking at the other codes and how much we're requiring, talking to developers and what they can handle, and just in talking to the council what they felt like was appropriate as well, and our just what we've reviewed so far. Commercial projects and uses are going to be required for all the projects where they front principal streets, which we will define as collectors and arterials, so not local streets. So, for example, where 4800 South is in the mixed-use zone, pretend that Mike Brodsky's project wasn't built. The street that he put in to do his residential is a local street, that Hill House Cove. But 4800 is a principal, so he would have to do commercial. We'd calculate his commercial based on the 4800 South frontage, but not on the Hill House Cove frontage. We wouldn't punish him for that. Commerce Drive. On Commerce Drive, that's a collector, so you have to calculate commercial for your project on Commerce Drive. But where your side street if you're a project down on Burger Lane, that's a local street, no commercial requirement, literally. You can just do the residential. That's the only kind of places where you'd be able to do it with no commercial requirement.
I think that's wise.
And that way, our thinking was that then it contributes more units, and you don't get the density without the commercial, but for other reasons. But then it contributes to the commercial units that are underneath one on Commerce Drive, because there's more residents coming out there to Commerce going up to the project or to the train station or wherever else they're going. But there's no need for them to try to put commercial uses back on Burger Lane that's dead ending against the freeway wall. That's not going to do anybody any good. So
it's good for tattoo shops and chop shops for auto dealers.
I don't even know if it's good for that. We'll see. But we're proposing that it only be required on the principal streets. Where we calculate it, only on the principal streets. Horizontal mixed use, again, is allowed, but requires that master site plan approval. And that's important, especially in those zones that we're going to be implementing where there's already commercial. We're really talking about redeveloping, adding residential to sites that are already commercial. And we have proposed a reduction of the calculated commercial requirement in the VMU zone, that village mixed use, and in the MCMU West. So if you are a project in the MCMU West district and you're pretty significantly separated walking distance wise from that track station and platform, you can do things in the proposed code to reduce your commercial, but you don't get to just reduce the commercial. You give us back great side amenities that make it a good neighborhood, that make it viable and vibrant, even though it doesn't have great commercial with it and doesn't have as much access to tracks.
Hey, it's so interesting. So thus far you've talked about reducing the commercial requirements. Haven't heard anything about the density.
There's reductions in density too. That's how you reduce it's one of the methods that you use to reduce your commercial. It's you basically admitting that you're not as mixed use as you would like to be if you were closer. And if you're not as mixed use, then you don't need as much density either. So if you're only going to provide X amount of commercial because it just isn't viable for that, well, if it's not viable for that much commercial, then it's not viable for 65 units an acre either. So reduce that for us and provide other things. Do a different kind of mixed use. That's just a great neighborhood with lots of great amenities, different types of housing, mixing housing types lets you reduce commercial as well. So you do a different kind of mixed use that has a little commercial still, but not as much. There's a limit on how much you can reduce the commercial to in all of these zones, in these two zones. You can reduce it down to certain levels, but no further. So you don't get to eliminate it on your principal frontage, but you can reduce it by giving up other things and providing different things.
And I hadn't thought this until you just said, I didn't realize you said use other mixes. So that means single family condo apartment. That's mixing.
Or even townhouse apartment. So let's say that you're allowed at 300 units by your density calculation, but you have lousy commercial frontage. So you want to try to reduce what you're required. You're required to do, I'm just making up numbers to make it easy to do. So you come in and say you get 300 units, but you have to do 10,000 square feet of commercial. And you just don't think you can do it because it's really not great frontage, even though it's on a collector. So if you want to do that, well, there's a couple of ways you can reduce your commercial requirement, but you're only going to be able to reduce it down to about 3,000 square feet. And that's going to be painful. You're going to reduce your density down to no more than 40 units per acre, no matter where you are. And you're going to add amenities, and you're going to add open space, and you're going to provide modern income housing, and you're going to mix your housing types. So that's going to further constrain your density too, because you don't get to do, now we've got you down to say 150 units or 300 units or 200 units, but I don't want all 200 of those units to be just an apartment block because you don't have great commercial. So we shouldn't have to do we shouldn't have to bear the impacts of what comes with a 200 unit apartment block. So give us 100 units of apartments and give us 50 units of townhomes and give us some small lot cottage development or something like that. And that works for mixed use.
That's promoting life cycle living.
Right, exactly. So it meets that goal.
That's great. So, but talk to me, because I can't get my mind around about, I understand what you said, well, I don't have great commercial. It's because you're locational. But who determines that? I mean, the builder is just looking to sell units and make money off of selling units. Right. Do they have any say of who the commercial is and how well they'll do? I'm like,
well, they should know the business for one thing. They should know what they're getting into and understand it and this makes them, they all come in doing market studies too, saying how much can I really support in this area? How much drive-by traffic do I have? How much am I going to get from how much traffic am I going to get from my units?
But explain to me how that works, because let's say I build this, everything you just described, I then sell off the condos and walk away, or do I keep the commercial and rent it out? The builder typically is renting out the commercial and selling everything else, or how does that work?
That's a good question. It could go either way. That would be controlled by that master site plan agreement. How he did it, when he got to get shucked of it, or lease it out, or how soon he had to. When you're building them over the units, when you're building vertical units over the commercial, you don't have to worry about it as much because they have to build it to hold up the other units. So they got to build it either way. And then it's just in their best interest to lease it out or sell it to somebody who thinks they can lease it out. And honestly, at that point, I don't think we really care who owns it. We just want to see it exist and get leased. If it's horizontal.
So it happens both ways equally? I'm just trying to understand the process more.
What do you mean by both ways equally? Sorry.
Meaning the builder 50-50 will sell the whole property. Like I built it, sell it to the real estate agent who's going to rent out these places, or
I don't know if that's. I don't know, to be honest. I don't know.
Do they usually keep the commercial and make money?
I think it depends on the developer. Most of them that I'm aware of so far have kept the commercial. The ones that I've dealt with so far, they still own their commercial. Yeah.
They just rent out.
And they're leasing it out.
Landlords commercial.
Yeah. Huh. You mentioned cottages. Can we talk about cottage villages? Like what are you envisioning for that?
Cottage clusters? I didn't put any pictures of cottage clusters in, but I have a picture in my mind. So individually owned cottages, like condos, but single family detached condos on condo property that's held in common that are very close together and in tight little courts.
Do they have individual parking, or do they have a single parking lot for the entire village?
That's a good question. It could go either way. There could be a little tiny parking. They're more likely, I think cottage clusters are more likely to have a ring road around the outside that provides some parking by access to the back.
Are we talking like scale of these cottages? How small are you willing to go on these cottages?
That's a good question. I haven't really.
I mean, if someone came in and proposed 2,600 square foot cottages, is it something we would consider?
That's a pretty good sized cottage.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's not a cottage.
If it were 2 stories, that footprint probably
That's a house.
20 individuals, 600 square foot.
Okay. I thought you said 2,600.
I don't think that's out of whack. Really, 1,300 square foot footprint for a cottage with a second floor maybe works. Yeah. if it's, I don't see ramblers making good cottage.
That's more like a
Structure.
tiny house than a cottage.
Yes, very much so, and that's what I'm getting at.
Oh, is that 20 600 square foot cottages?
600 square foot.
Sure. You know, it depends on the market. I would let the market decide that. If I'm being honest, I would let the market decide that. If somebody wants to build that because they think there's a market for that, I'm always going to err on the side of letting developers build what they think they can sell, what they think will work, because ultimately they're putting their skin in it, not me.
Is there
600 feels small to me.
It is small, but I think that there is a new generation of folks that maybe 600 is large, and they're comfortable with that.
And if those folks are available buyers and renters here, then I'd say let them do it.
Do you have
And I think there's a market for that. Our first house was, I want to say 880 square feet.
Yeah.
And we had a full basement, but for young starting out, 880 square feet was great.
It's a cottage.
We had a kitchen, we had a bedroom, we had a bathroom.
and a
Well, we had
place
two
for a little
bedrooms.
teeny couch.
And a little teeny living space.
And is there a district where it's appropriate or not appropriate?
You know, I don't think so. We have not, even in our single family neighborhoods. So our R18 zone does not have a minimum house size standard. I don't know if that's.
But it has an 8,000 square foot lot
It has
minimum.
an 8,000 square foot lot. So it's not common for people to come in and build a 600 square foot home on an 8,000 or 10,000 square
So
foot
But
lot.
they could.
We needed
Good.
R14.
We wouldn't say anything to them about it. So I don't think I would impose it here either. If we don't impose it in single family neighborhoods, I don't think I would do it here, where you're trying to build that density. And what does that work out to be? The other question is, what does that 600 square foot cottage work out to be in terms of density on that parcel that it's going onto? So
And with an agreement, you'd be open to unusual setbacks and
yes,
proximity?
Absolutely. I mean, that would be the point
Okay.
of cottages being single family but detached. The point would be the proximity of them to their cottages, different setbacks, et cetera. They'd have to be done with PUDs and condominium subdivisions, et cetera, but it could be done.
But wouldn't we want to create a new zone maybe we could create a new zone with like an R14?
Well, now you're getting into things that that don't. This is mixed use zoning, so mixed use
okay.
zoning would allow it either way. But if we wanted to, in the future, when we hitch up next year for residential infill, we'll talk about R14.
Okay. I don't want to muddy the water.
Okay, there you go. There's room for that conversation, but probably the mixed use doesn't need it because it can allow it anyway.
Okay.
We should have that conversation going forward as we try to,
So the cottages would go in a mixed use though?
Yes, yeah. We'd be talking about the housing types that might mix uses in a mixed use development as opposed to just having all apartments.
I love that idea of
Yeah.
the way that you can decrease your commercial requirements is you increase these other things.
Yeah, increase the other idea.
Yeah.
Increase the other good things you can do instead.
It seems like such a good balance for some of those sites that need to be unique, but can't support the commercial like you were saying. Like I think
Yeah.
that's a really, really cool way to approach that.
We're hoping that it basically, the hope is that kind of mechanism will make developers mean it. If you really feel like you can do mixed use here and you're asking us to change the zoning, but you don't think you can do much of the commercial, then be willing to give something up in order to do it.
It all sounds exciting. I like that everything you've said so far. Sure. We haven't talked about traffic at all. That's everybody's.
Traffic studies are part of this, though. You have to do a traffic impact study to do any project in the new zones that we're implementing. In the existing zones, you're still going to wind up seeing traffic impact studies, but they are mandated as part of any approval for a master site plan. And the master site plans are required for the new zones that we're proposing, centers mixed use and village mixed use.
And they're all around our collectors,
Collectors and arterials, right.
arterials or BRT or transit centers. So we've got that.
Yeah, you're going to see better transit options in those areas. I think you're going to see successful traffic studies.
So
for all
say
of those.
our traffic study comes back and doesn't support whatever was proposed, could the developers then come back and say, okay, we're going to reduce our commercial and increase our, weigh out this balance so that we maybe can fit into the traffic study that came back?
I think,
it gives them flexibility, I guess.
We'd allow somebody to respond to the traffic study and say, well, we're going to move things around differently or propose it differently if we can't.
Add more condos and less apartments or something, that maybe.
Something that might change that balance.
But traffic volumes are always considered regionally, not just at the local site as well. And so a lot of these projects, even though they sound like they're really going to impact, it just isn't going to do it in the regional
based
scale
on
of
the
things.
locations of where these are already proposed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So let's talk about density just a little bit because we have proposed some changes based on the council's inquiries about it. And the main concern that the council had when they were looking at the zone changes that came to them from the Planning Commission last year, and the concerns that we've had from Public Works and other departments in the city, have revolved around the inability for us to control some of the density that would be allowed, even though they weren't asking for as much density for a project. And they were telling us, well, we're not going to do that much, but our zoning allowed it. So currently the MCCD zone allows 100 units per acre, and the TOD is still unlimited. You might remember back in, was it earlier than 2019, we limited the density in the MCCD to 100. What we're proposing in this new draft is that the MCCD be limited to 100 west of State Street, 100 units per acre, and 80 units per acre to the acre east of State Street, where their access is not quite as good. It's still significantly high, probably it's still a good density. We haven't seen projects that are over 80 units the acre yet. So we feel like we're comfortable with that. And then we are proposing limiting the TOD zone to 100 units the acre, just like we have in the MCCD. We don't have any projects that have touched that 100 units the acre in the MCCD or the TOD yet. Although we've gotten close on a couple.
Close, okay, I was gonna say how close.
I know people like to say that 100 acres is high density, and it is higher density, but downtown Salt Lake is currently approving projects. If you pencil them out, their densities are over 400 units an acre. Right. So, you know, people think, oh, there's 30 units an acre. This is high density. This is not high density.
Well, that's the thing about density, is it's a function of how much is in what space. So I don't know, I'm going to sound weird here, but I'm going to say it anyway. 100 units per acre can look just like 40 units per acre, depending on the design and the scale of the project. And we're talking about mixed uses where the 40 units per acre is calculated over the site, and you have a bunch of commercial spread out with it too. So people are always asking, we keep looking for projects to show people and say, what does 100 units the acre look like? I could show you 16 different things, and they'll all be 100 units the acre. Some will be 200 units the acre. We have apartments in the city that Zach's calculated the density for that you wouldn't guess. Or what was the highest you saw in existing stuff? 115, 125? 156 units the acre. We didn't approve any of those. The 156 units the acre old apartment complex on 4500 South. You'd never in a million years think that it's over 100 units the acre. It just looks like an old apartment building. But that's my point, is people freak out about density, but they don't know what 100 units looks like or feels like. What we really can measure is the impact from it. So traffic impact studies, parking valuations, et cetera. That's what we should be focused on, really, and how much it supports the site that it's on.
They just hear high density. That's all that they hear over and over again. High density, high density,
it's really,
high density.
It's really unit numbers that bother them in certain areas. So.
I appreciate what you said. I'm trying to keep focused on your comment just there because I like that. But just for, it's all relative. Everything in life's relative, right? And exactly. You said, you know, Salt Lake is 400. Some areas are 400 per acre, and so 100 per acre is not that much. But we're not trying to become Salt Lake. No. You've said, you've used a really nice term.
That's why these densities, we haven't seen it. And I guess my biggest deal with it and not being uncomfortable with proposing the limit or allowing the limit, I wasn't uncomfortable with the unlimited either, because I think to a very large extent, and I'm going to say 100% up to this point in time, the market has dictated what we've allowed in density. We've had an upper limit that would allow it, and they've come in and said, what we can make work on this site is 65 units the acre, so that's what we're going to build, or 80 units the acre.
But I have to say, residents who don't know a lot, less than I don't know a lot about this as well, but the residents that don't know a lot about city planning, that scares them to hear that the builder dictates what they can do, because that's not necessarily in the interest of the resident. No. It's in the interest of the builder.
Remember too that these projects have to be livable to fill the rents and pay the rents on them. And people have invested $20 and $30 and $40 million in these things. So it's not like they do it without knowing that this is a saleable product and that they can make it work. And to that end, if we cap it, what we've done in capping them at certain levels is really trying to control the likely impacts of not the visuals so much, because like I said, the visuals can be almost anything. You could show me a picture right now and I look at this stuff every day and I wouldn't be able to tell you what it is per acre. It's too different in different projects. But we can tell you what measurably the impacts for parking and for traffic and for strain on infrastructure are for those things. And that's what these densities that we're proposing are based on. Not so much on visuals, because that can be controlled through other means, and we'll keep doing that.
I hate to bring this variable up, but I think I've learned more about it and why I shouldn't bring it up, but like crime rates too should be included in those variables that we're considering.
Sure. And you're going to see statistics, and we could put them up there, but if you go ahead and look for a study about high density and crime, and you're going to see that statistically there is not a measurable increase in crime in higher density projects. The density is not what determines high incidence of crime. The density doesn't cause it. management of properties causes it. Deterioration of neighborhoods causes it. And single-family neighborhoods all over the country deteriorate and have higher crime rates. It's just not, the density is not what causes it. But we do want to be sensitive to that. People are concerned that density causes crime. The statistics don't bear that out. But there you go.
Income related?
Yeah, percentage-wise. You have to look at numbers of units. The very base of it is that if you have 2,000, you have a higher density, so you have 2,000 units that are in apartments, and you're measuring domestic calls by the police to those units. We'll measure those domestic calls to the units as 2,000 units versus 2,000 single-family homes, and there's no appreciable difference in those two numbers. But yeah, they feel like they're going to Fire Clay all the time because there's 2,000 units there. So they are. But they're not going there more often statistically than other places. That's the point.
And income really doesn't even play into it a lot. It's really the quality of the neighborhood and the integrity of the neighborhood. If you have a deteriorating neighborhood, you're probably going to have more crime, whether it's a wealthy neighborhood or a poor neighborhood. It just, if no one's looking out for anything, no one's calling the police and keeping the police engaged in the neighborhood, and the neighbors aren't engaged in it, the opportunities for crime increase.
That's a great point, Travis. And one of the things about mixed use is that you hear in studies when you read articles about them, et cetera, is that one of the points is that they provide that constant activity. There's people there during the day that live there. There's people there during the day that work there, that are shopping and eating. There's people there at night that are shopping and eating. There's people there all night because they eat there, because they live there. I might eat all night sometimes. Occasionally I sleep. But there's people staying there all the time. So there's always eyes on that street in mixed use environments. And that's a good thing for crime. I can't say that they cause lower crime. I haven't got those numbers, but we can look at that kind of thing. So anyway, the existing current 100, and then we're proposing 80 east of State Street, 100 west of State Street, and then the MCMU that allowed residential density units per acre.
Can I say something real quick? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're fine. That's the reason we're doing the discussion.
I don't disagree. I'm just wondering, and maybe you'll educate me, but my first thought when I saw 80 acres east, 80 per acre east, 100 per west, I hear someone saying, no, that's divisive. Why east versus west?
Right, because and the simple reason is because the east doesn't have as good an access to the transit as the west side does.
Can we say something then within this parameter of transit versus east versus west?
I've tried drafts like that. Those didn't work out. The simpler division was what was desired by most of the departments. They wanted it to be a simpler to read code and the measurements can be skewed, and we have one kind of fix in that we'll get to actually here in just a second, actually on the table below. But in most instances, we tried to get away from a lot of measurements to the station like we've done in the past and just set boundaries for the density and give you incentives to raise your density by providing better stuff. And so just like you can reduce commercial in some of those zones, we're providing a way for you to, we have a base density that's allowed by the zone when you get it, and then incremental increases in that density if you can do certain things for us that make it a better mixed use site. So, and we'll get to all of those too. But we tried to steer the code away from so much of the measuring walking distances and everything because they get skewed and it's hard to get two people to agree on how to do it at any one time. But it does make sense. I hear what you're saying. The other alternative was just honestly for me to leave it at 100 for both sides. But Public Works felt like decreasing that overall density on the east side would be a little better, just because of the access and parking. But I can take that into consideration. I mean, we're not drafted all the way fully yet. So if that's a thing, I can keep looking at it. So see me after class. Is that? In the MCMU is one of the only zones where we're still proposing a gradation of density based on your distance from that platform. So distance to Murray Central Station within 1/8 of a mile, that's a city block, basically. That's just over the 660 feet that makes a standard Salt Lake Valley block. Your current allowance is 100 units. Within a 1/4 mile, it's 100 units per acre. This is the current stuff in the gray bar here. At a half a mile and less, you're 80 units per acre. And at 50 units per acre at over half a mile, and if you're more than a mile or more, you're at 40 units per acre. That's pretty generous. The Van Winkle Crossing project was 40 units per acre. They actually built at 39. That's what worked for them, but 40 was their allowance because they were way more than a mile from the station. So looking at that as kind of our basis, we came back to it and proposed that in the MCMU East, in that East sub-district, within that earliest close area to the station, that city block plus 80 units per acre, and 65 units per acre within the 1/4 mile, 50 units per acre in that half a mile, and outside the half a mile instead of the mile. It's where you drop to the 40. And although some of these properties in the MCMU West District are within a half a mile of the station, and a couple of them can touch with one corner of their property a quarter mile of the station, that distance doesn't come anywhere close to a quarter of a mile walking from their sites. Like on Burger Lane, for example, it's a good solid over half a mile to walk it.
Because there's no connectivity. They'd have to go
No
around,
good
right?
connection. So yeah, exactly, Maren. So trying to respond to that, we've just said if you're in the MCMU West, your density is 40 units to the acre. Now, I know that can feel a little punishing, but again, 40 units to the acre is not nothing. 40 units to the acre is that site on Van Winkle Crossing, if you remember it. That could be 400 units on a 10-acre site. That's not nothing. It's twice as much as we allow in any multifamily zone in the city.
I think it's a good incentive, though, to develop some of those properties that would have a harder time supporting the current standards because
Right. We
there's limitations to those sites.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, no, I think it helps. But that's what we're trying to do is respond to the area a little more in more of a nuanced way than just the general mixed use zone did before. And we hope we're hitting near it. Does that make sense to you all, how we're calculating those? And then that final at the bottom, there's one caveat in that whole thing, and this applies to the MCMU East and West, but in the West, it's already 40 units to the acre, so it's more for the East. If the measured walking distance from the project to the station platform is more than a half a mile, you get 40 units to the acre. If you're more than a half a mile, we're not going to get the benefits from that walk shed is not going to be good enough to really get the benefits of mixed use, of full mixed use with more than about 40 units to the acre. Before we go any further than this, I wanted to point one thing out. The current zones that we've had on the books for density are very, very, very progressive. There's not a lot of other zones in the valley allowing these kinds of densities. And even at 40 and 65 and 80, if people are doing them, we're still well above what a lot of people allow, recognizing that we're by these close stations and we're trying to really concentrate our density in the core of the city. So I still feel comfortable with it from a planning perspective. And the public works folks are much more comfortable with these densities and providing the infrastructure for them and not straining the infrastructure too much for them. So that's where they're coming from. Does that make sense? One other thing, sorry, I keep remembering things. The measurement that like I said, we're still measuring from the properties in the MCMU East to the station platform. The old language just said closest points of the properties measured in a straight line. So if you had a funky property with a long arm on it that came out toward the station and it was close, great. And you just measured to the station property, fantastic. That might be a quarter of a mile, but the rest of your property might be well outside of that. So what we've done is asked them to measure from the property to the station platform. That's your true walking distance anyway, not the station parking lot, to the station platform. And then also, if the property is more than 2 acres, when we're doing the calculations for what's allowed for the density, we can break that acreage up acre by acre and say, well, this acreage is within a quarter of a mile, so we'll give you your extra units on that. We'll give you density for that part, but your next 2 acres are outside of that quarter mile, so you're reduced on those 2 acres. So that's a little more nuanced as well.
So are you taking straight line distance?
Yeah.
Or are you taking
those
walking distance?
We tried both ways. Those are straight line distances. And if you want to show that, we had a draft that we've removed at this point, but because we're only dealing with the half a mile distance. If you can't show with a walking distance that you're a half a mile out, you don't get anything but 40. So this is just the MCMU East, by the way. This doesn't apply to the MCCD, that's 100 units per acre. This doesn't apply to the TOD, that's 100 units per acre. This is just that MCMU East. And part of it is to recognize, I'm going to fly back through. Part of it is to recognize that 40 units per acre is to recognize this significant break here that you can't get across there walking. There's lack of connections. Maybe they could be made, but they would be significant structural infrastructure changes. And the tracks themselves making a significant barrier for some properties. We have properties that could be developed in the near future in the MCMU East that are going to be a stone's throw from, that you could throw a Nerf ball across the tracks and hit the station, but your walking distance is going to be like 3/4 of a mile. Yep. So it's a significantly large station area, and we want to make sure that we're sensitive to that. So those projects don't need to be super dense because they're not really, what did you say earlier that Reed Ewing calls it, transit adjacent, but they're not adjacent enough to provide direct access to it. That matters for that density. So that's the thinking behind that, Ned. And we wanted to measure that walking distance, but only where we were talking about not allowing more than the 100 or not allowing more than the 40, as opposed to going the other direction. If you can show that you've got a good half-mile walking distance and you're really only within an eighth of a mile or a quarter of a mile, then you get your 65, your 80 units per acre, and that's sufficient for almost everything that's come to us so far. So we should be okay. In the MCMU East. I wouldn't do that to the MCCD or to the TOD. Density in the VMU. This is where it gets a little complicated, but we started talking about it just a moment ago, and Maren asked her question and made her point about adding things to it. The base density that we're proposing in the village mixed use is 25 units per acre. What's showing on the top of those three deals, sorry, and I apologize because there's a column missing here for mix of housing types. We talked about mixing housing types being a way that you can increase your density. No, I'm sorry, that's in the commercial reduction table, so that's why it's not here. 25 units per acre, open space is 15%. We require that. We don't require any affordable housing, and we require amenities based on your project size, every 100 units. 30 units per acre, if you want to get to 30 units per acre, you need to do you need to meet two of these three requirements. Either you increase your open space by 10% altogether and add 2 additional projects, or you provide 15% of the tenants, reserve 15% of the units for tenants at 80% of median income and provide some affordable housing.
Is that for the state? Is that for the county? Is that for the city?
County median income. That's defined in our code in another place.
Okay.
That's perfect. We define that as the most current Salt Lake County median income.
And how long does that apply to the property?
How long does that median income apply?
Yeah.
Do you mean how long do you have to meet that requirement?
Yep.
For your tenancy. So for your lease, if you
But
get
the-
your big dream job and you're out of that range.
I mean, but the person leasing the facility has to have 15% of the residents at less than 80% of AMI
Yes.
for the first 5 years of which they're apartment complex, or for the duration of the.
Duration of the project, that would be forever. So, and that would be controlled again by that master site plan agreement. So, and they do this is done already. So there are apartments that are reserved for people at certain median income levels. And when they show those apartments, they make you prove that your income is less than that. And you don't get to move in if you have more than that. And periodically they check to make sure they're still in compliance because they have rules governing them. And you have to keep showing them your W-2s that you're not making more than the median income.
I feel like people really get up in arms about projects like that.
Yeah.
If developers only have to choose 2 of those 3 things, how likely do you think that they'll most of the time choose the other 2 amenities?
I don't know, but probably most of the time.
Yeah.
And this question got asked during the council discussion. I'm glad you asked it. So I think it's important to remember that this is only one, for dealing with moderate income housing and providing affordable housing, this is one shot at it in one zone that we're proposing. We should be doing more as a city for moderate income housing, having a more detailed moderate income housing plan, working better with the agencies that can provide down payment assistance, et cetera, and we're going to start doing that. We need to do more. This is only one shot at it.
Yeah, it just feels like we're giving them an out of requiring something that could have a big impact.
That's a good point.
Because we just let them choose, okay, just do the other 2.
Right.
If you're going to increase your density by a certain amount,
Sure.
But in fairness, too, 80% of AMI it's a pretty high threshold in the big scheme of affordable housing. I mean, I think a lot of I shouldn't say a lot, but projects in other areas are 50% or 40% of AMI.
The fully subsidized stuff.
Yeah.
But how often is that?
80% is 72,000.
Right, but how often are those fully subsidized places going in? Are we seeing a lot of?
I think it
those kind of
depends on cities. I mean,
projects,
a city that has a housing authority like Salt Lake City,
right,
you see a
and we
lot of those
don't.
projects.
Right, we don't. So if we're trying,
We have the county housing authority, and what we need to do a better job of is working with them to provide more of that. If that's what we need to do to meet the goals that the state gives us, we're doing some of that. I think we can do more. And we can do other things outside of just providing units that are reserved at that level. I think the down payment assistance would be. I've read a lot of I've read a lot of stuff lately about the biggest hurdle to people being the down payment. It's one thing to think you got to pay $600,000 for a house, and even if you can scrape that payment together, where are you going to get the 20% down of that? I don't have $120,000 laying around. Nobody does.
yeah, it just feels like this is a little bit like best wishes.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
we
we could-
hope developers do this.
paper.
Right. We hope that they do this and offer this as a way to provide more medium income housing, but actually nobody's going to elect to do it. So
It's a-
like we tried.
I don't know that nobody will elect, and I'll tell you why. Because there are funds that we have. I don't think that no one will elect. I can't say that it's the most likely choice, honestly, because I wouldn't try to guess what people would decide to do. But if you look at it, for example, 10% total increase, that's a 10% increase. So 25% of your site is now open space and landscaping. And I think that's great.
Yeah, but how much less are they going to get pushback from surrounding
from the
neighborhoods when they elect not to do that one and just do the other two?
Sure.
You know,
Less
like it's
pushback.
going to be a way more contended project knowing
Oh, I see
that
what you're saying.
15%.
Yeah. Oh, no,
so maybe
absolutely.
they'll just, in that case, be like, oh, we can sell the neighborhood more on increasing our, 10% total on 2 more
I think
amenities.
that's where Zach's number comes into play. When you're talking about 80% of the median income, you're talking about people making $72,000 a year for their household income.
And
I don't.
That's not.
this metric, while it's in the code, I think this is kind of hidden to an applicant coming through when a presentation is given in Planning Commission. I don't think that the average citizen knows the matrix that went into the particular project.
No, for sure not. But I will tell you that when developments, anything, yes, it gets labeled that if even any percentage of any, development is like, oh, these are their reserved amount for low income, and it just sends off.
I would go so far as to guess that everyone in this room is low income in Summit County. We would all qualify at probably a 60% threshold.
Right, but we don't live in Summit County. I'm just saying.
I know, but
yes, I agree that the median income is still a high level, but
The stigma is.
the stigma just already labels that project as like a project that we don't want. And so people, rather than offering that, even for the 2 families that are, making $72,000 and barely scraping by and could benefit from this, those developers are going to choose the 2 other options.
And I don't think you're wrong. I just think we could make it a required option.
Right.
I didn't get a lot of support for that.
Yeah.
For probably the same reasons.
Exactly. So, but it almost feels arbitrary to put it on there knowing.
Well, yes, but there might be, for those cases where it would be possible, I would love to see somebody do it.
It would be a cool way to incentivize
And
people to do
I'm
it.
willing to stand here and say we should do it, even though it's getting.
And there's-
But when you have to remember too that even if they don't choose it, mixed use housing is going to help the overall affordability of housing in the city. So no matter what, it's good. We have other ways that we should be dealing with it and could be dealing with it, providing assistance for people, rental assistance. So nobody even knows that it's a low income project, because it's not a low income project. It's a unit that a family has been qualified to use, and Murray's participating using our CDBG funds for that, et cetera. We can do more of that, and we should be.
Well, it doesn't prevent you from doing, say, the first 2 and still doing something less than the requirement that's there for the 3rd one.
Yeah.
So if you do 2 of them, okay, you do, the 2 first columns, but you could still do 5% or 10% reserved for tenants.
But I agree with what Marin's been saying, but like Commissioner Ney was saying, if these details aren't always readily available to the public, a builder might look at, why do I need to waste land and open space when I can have additional X number of units by just meeting this criteria, and if I can sweep it under the carpet. So someone might go for it just because they see dollar signs.
Yeah, well, and potentially, but again, they have to reserve them for those folks, and it is a give on the developer side. Reserving them for those folks means that they don't charge them as much. There's a formula through the county housing.
But the developer also does not require to leave open space. I mean, I would prefer open
and
space.
that has a maintenance cost as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're just looking for possibilities and hoping that they choose the ones that are
I like it. I'm all for it. I just
It's a good
am
point.
skeptical.
I understand that. I totally do.
The beauty of my neighborhood is that there are multi-million-dollar houses, and on the other side of the street, there's Section 8 housing, and that is the beauty of my neighborhood, is that there is that diversity of the neighborhood, and
I 1,000% agree, Travis. I'm just saying when a new project is coming in.
yeah.
And people are looking closely. They might not know where to look, but if the right person knows where to look, then that's an easy way to build resistance to the
Clamor.
project. Yeah,
Should
clamor,
we make it?
right?
Should we make
Like-
it more? Should we? And what you're saying in part too is that that's harder for us for one thing, but it's
Weigh
also
it more.
it also give the developer sees that, and they're not stupid. They know that that's a difficult
Right.
and
Thing
they
to
want their
do.
project approved. it's an easier route to just do the landscaping or whatever. Should we, and this is why we're having the discussion, should we make those,
Wait,
should we make them harder, the landscaping parts harder, so that the other is more equal? Does it feel unequal is what I'm
well, I
guessing.
think what I feel like Marin's saying, and I agree, but is that we might be giving ourselves credit. We look good, but we're really not doing anything, by making that a requirement. No one's going to pick it, but at least we can say we put it as an option, right?
I'd like it to be a real incentive. So
if we
what we
weight
ought to
it
do is
more-
raise the landscaping percentage or whatever to make it more, to make you really think about whether you want to go landscaping or want to fight the affordable housing fight. I'm down with that. Should I
How
raise it?
viable is that though? Like how many developers do you think would look at, when you put it as like the most, it's not like the best option, but it's like maybe the option that they would be most likely to choose, does that drive away developers or they're like, never mind?
I don't know, because they've always, at the end of it all, they've always got that base density to fall back on.
Yeah.
And realistically, from the people that we talked to that were potentially looking at the mixed use zones that would be village mixed use zones, 25 is not way off what they want. They want about 30. I bet they'd settle at 25. If it's too hard for them to do, they'll probably settle at 25 in lots of instances.
Yeah, right. So then,
Because remember, we're not talking about you had to buy this land and it was X amount of dollars and you need to get every dollar out of it from the bare dirt. It's an existing commercial property and we are letting you add units. 25 feels like a give already. 30 ought to get asked something. So I'm not opposed to asking for more in the incentives to get to 30 at all if I've asked low. And I'm shooting in the dark. 15% is our base requirement. I felt like adding 10% on top of that to 25% landscaping was pretty big because people gripe about adding open space to their projects as it is at 15%
yeah,
sometimes.
it's true.
So I felt like it was probably evenly matched, but I might be
And
off.
you probably have a better sense of that than I do. I just
I don't know.
look
I
at those
doubt
three
that.
options and wonder
Well,
if
but
that,
that's why it's that's why I want to have the discussion, because if you look at it from the outside, and I've been looking at it in an echo chamber for so long that who knows if I have a better beat on it or not. If you're looking at it from the outside and you're going, it would just be easy to do these others and not fight the fight, then I might want to increase those a little. So I'm going to take that into account.
I
and
don't
start
know.
looking at
I'm not a developer. I don't know, but I
have Zach, and I can set him on a nerdy project to do a couple of schemas of what a
projects
site
for
would,
that.
what 25% does to a site versus 15%, and see if that ought to be bumped up a little bit to make it more in line with. I think that helps me a lot, actually.
And amenities. I've been waiting. What is an amenity? How much does it cost? What is it?
There are all kinds of amenities that you could provide, and
Playground set,
I'm sorry, so
a dog park, or
dog park,
swing set for kids, or
dog park, community garden, interactive fountain, club room, gazebo,
place it,
oh wow, how did I do that? Xeriscaping, these little swing. I love these little swing tables, the picnic
at the
tables with
gateway.
swings on them.
so cute.
I don't understand those, honestly. Every time I see them, I'm
seems
like,
dangerous.
you swing into the table.
I've sat at that table. I know Ned sat at that table. They are dangerous. These are orthodontic.
Swing into the table.
They're a built-in Heimlich maneuver.
Swinging lunch.
Absolutely. So project amenities, what we've always required, we don't even require them in the current codes, but people just do them because you don't want to build an apartment that no one wants to live in. So they provide some amenities. There's a pool, there's a rooftop deck, there's a club room, whatever. We're saying there ought to be like 3 for the 100 units that there are. A rooftop deck, a pool, or whatever. And then beyond that, if you want more units and you want to use that to create more units, especially in these CMU zones, then give us more amenities. Give us extra amenities in your project, especially ones that can be used by the public. If you're going to let the public come into them, this is what we were talking about earlier, where we're building these bones of infrastructure that will allow us to do smaller scale, more organic redevelopment of mixed use properties in the future. And in the future, I probably mean more than a couple of years, Travis. I'm probably talking about 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm
20 years.
retiring and I'm retiring and you're the mayor or whatever. They'll be
I hope to never be the mayor.
let the record show. But that's what we're talking about, amenities that there's a gamut you could pull from, and we've listed them, but then said the Planning Commission can consider whatever amenities you're proposing, but you have to be able as a commission to find it to be a true amenity and not just something they were going to do anyway. Look, we've lined our hallway with art. It's our art hallway. That's our amenity. Yeah. Probably not. But if you're going to do extra things outside, especially to the public, I would love to see that in projects. So they tell me I'm crazy, assuming that people will open their open space amenities to the public, but I don't think so. We have creeks running through the city. We have areas where we're going to have pass-throughs through buildings and projects, and maybe they're butting up against each other, and they plan where their building ends an open space on one side that could be a piatanal with another building that comes in from the other side on another development in the future. And that's an open space that everybody can use to access through the block or something. I hope that kind of thing happens. And I can't force it, or I can't get anyone to let me force it. But if it doesn't happen by force, it might happen naturally over time if we provide the opportunities, incentives for it. So.
New Orleans is just riddled with little teeny enclaves where bands are playing in all these little areas, and they're just organic spaces that developed in between projects.
Yeah, people over time have left them alone. We're gonna have to create that out of nothing for us. But if we provide the right kind of bones for it, it might start to exist. So I should have said this at the beginning too, but I'm going to email you these slides now that you've seen them, so you can go over some of these tables even in preparation for your, and realize there might be some slight changes based on our conversations about it, but I want you to be able to look at that in addition to the drafts when they come out next week. So the same kind of thing in the CMU, but it starts at 35 and goes to 45 as opposed to starting at 25 and going to 35 at the maximum. But the same kind of, I keep saying punishments and promising myself I won't say that. Same kind of punishments for getting there. You give us some things. I didn't want to make them so severe and unattainable like our current density or residential density bonuses are. So they're lesser than that. And that was kind of my starting point, was how bad could I make it? Let's not do that because I've never seen anybody do it. So let's bring it down from there.
So can I ask a question? Kind of, I'm not exactly sure of my question. Let me formulate. But basically, like my profession, like error of measurement or sensitivity, because 30 to 35 doesn't seem that significant to me.
5 units per acre?
Yeah, the difference between the CMU and the VMU. Can you go back real quick? What I mean by sensitivity, at what point do you realize, oh, this is more than over there?
Right.
This feels the same as over there.
It probably won't be visible to you.
So I just wonder if the numbers are not significant enough to make a difference. Should it be 20 and 40? I mean, when do you?
That's a good question, and I don't know in between. I don't know in between. What I know are my thresholds. The lower is what the development community will. Oh. Spanish word is I want. The lower threshold is what the development community can live with, and the upper threshold is what our public works facilities folks feel like they can handle given the areas that we're talking about and the likelihood of different properties developing.
Okay.
So that's really where they come from. And in the areas that are likely going to develop in CMU or ask for CMU, we can handle just a little bit more. And 10 units to the acre doesn't sound like a lot, but over a couple of 100 acres that might develop in different projects, it's a lot. Yeah. So it matters, but what really matters is the bottom and the top, not so much the middle, as long as it's in that range. Does that make sense? I hope that's answering your question. One of the things you're going to see in the CMU that you don't see, in the VMU is this category if you have additional commercial that you can provide. Again, those are in these heavy transit corridors. These are more mixed use, for lack of a better term, than the VMU areas. So you have this category, required commercial space. What's required by the code when we figure it out? And let's say you can give us 15% more, you can give us 30% more because maybe you're an existing site. And that gives you just a little incentive to, instead of tearing down the building that you have, repurposing that building, and that's good for sustainability and good for the environment. And it's good for us as a community to see buildings preserved and reused instead of just torn down, if it's possible in the project. So it allows them the freedom as developers to do kind of what makes sense for them, but it pushes them in certain directions from the get-go for us. If you can give us more commercial in those transit corridors, those transportation areas, those high traffic areas, they'll give that to us. And odds are you already have the space for it, or you had viable commercial in the past. Give us back what you can in a new format if you need to. Project amenities we talked about already. They're just super important in these kind of projects to make them livable. When you don't have space of your own to go out to and relax and let go, you need that public space. But that in turn pushes people out to public spaces to recreate and be together and makes a real sense of place and community. So that's good. Parking, this is a tough one. And again, we've been working closely with other staff and other departments on this. So a couple of things to background the parking standards that we're proposing. The residential parking that we're proposing and the commercial parking that we're proposing was based on the Urban Land Institute numbers that were used by a company that we hired to review the parking on a certain project that was in proposal. So we used that as a baseline because we had the data. So they came in and looked at mixed use and said, here's where your mixed use is. And it was in the MCCD. So it's the downtown. It's going to have some of the best access to transit, et cetera. And here's what we think market study-wise you're going to need for parking. So we use that as the basis and extrapolate it out from there for these numbers. So it's ULI based and based on a project. It assumes that the parking is generally speaking, not always, but mostly unbundled. In other words, the residential part's not gated off from the commercial parking. It's all used together. Not all the developers don't always like that, but that's how you get your best. It's how you get your best bang for your buck from your parking, because it allows the best joint sharing, right? So we want to see more of the parking unbundled if possible, and we push for that in the code and the specifics of the grammar of the code. It's all off-street parking that's required. The on-street stuff is just gravy. It's in front of the units and it makes them viable, but it's not what you're being required when you're told you need 100 parking spaces. You're on-street, it's your off-street. The parking language that we're promoting, or that we're proposing, does promote the use of structures, and structures that are accessible to the uses, that are close to them or connected to them directly, as opposed to separated from them when you're parking on the 4th level of your parking structure and going down the stairwell and crossing the access road and then into your units. We'd rather see it directly adjacent where it's possible.
Are there thresholds for structures?
For when you have to do it?
Yeah.
Those have been removed.
Okay.
So, and there never really were, I'm sorry, they haven't. So 50%, if your project is a 4-story project, 50% of it has to be in structures.
Okay.
That's still there.
Okay.
But there's no longer a division, and I'm glad you asked. There's no longer a division between, we had 2 standards for parking. One standard for when more than 25% of your project was in surface parking. So you had a big project and more than 25% of the parking for it that you were required was in surface instead of in structures. That was one parking standard. And then if you happened to be proposing a project that had structured parking for more than 75% of the project, then you had standard B. Everybody hated that when I was rewriting the codes, and so that's gone, and it's just a parking standard. And the only one that's left is that 50%. If you're a 4-story building or more, and most of the mixed-use buildings are, you do parking in structures. Now, mixed-use buildings in the VMU zone maybe won't be. In that village mixed use, you might just see townhomes in some projects. You might just see a couple of 3-story apartments adjacent to commercial in those projects. They won't be required necessarily to do 50% of their structured parking, but they can do all surface under this code, but that eats up space, and you want units where the space is, not.
Yeah, I think I just want to be really cautious not to take the Shopco site and have 4 acres of that site still remain parking.
Right, exactly. And I think the reason that I'm not too concerned about it is because they didn't do that. I wasn't, the development community seems to be responding well to structured parking, at least to a couple of decks of parking in use. And that seems to be going well. But it isn't required other than the 4-story buildings. 50% of it's got to be in structure. I'm glad you asked that. It does also lean, the current parking standards just deal with unit counts. MCCD parking says you need one parking space for every 1 unit. It doesn't take into account how many bedrooms are in those units at all. We've gone to a standard, the ULI standard does bedrooms and does different parking standards based on those bedrooms. So when we give you a parking analysis of a project that comes in one of these zones, it's no longer going to say there's this many units, so there's this much parking. It's going to have been broken down by the number of bedrooms that are in it. And that gives the developers, again, some freedom to say, well, that's a lot of parking, and I don't want to do that much parking, so there's an easy way to not do that much parking. It's to change your bedroom situation, change your bedroom counts. And depending on where you're going, that might be easier or harder to do. But it makes them be context sensitive instead of just us in our code. They have to look at their project based on where it is and how many bedrooms they really want to have, as opposed to just saying, well, I got room for 3 bedrooms, so I'm going to throw all the units in as 3 bedrooms. Well, that's going to be a lot of parking, because 3 bedrooms on 9th East is going to generate a need for a lot of parking, admittedly. Nobody in a project on 3rd East or on 7th East or get there eventually, on 9th East, is walking down to the bus station at Fashion Place West. So with no further ado, here's the parking table basically, and this will be in your slides that I send you after the meeting. So the MCCD still calls out studios, and again, this is based on that study that was done for us based on the ULI standards. Studios at 1 bedroom per, or 1 space per unit, 1.05 for a single bedroom unit, 1.5 spaces for a 2-bedroom unit, and 2.5 for anything 3 bedrooms and above. So ostensibly, you're not going to have a ton of those. So you can't think of it as all the parking is 2.5 spaces per unit because there's 4 3-bedroom units in it. That's not how it would work. We'd take those 4 3-bedroom units and calculate that parking and do them by the numbers.
Is there a reason why you jump from 1.5 to 2.5 other than just account for 4-bedroom or 5-bedroom? I mean,
yeah,
no one's going to know that, but
not likely that they do 4 and 5 bedrooms at this time, and so ULI didn't take it into consideration when they did the analysis. The other thing that you're going to see up here is that MCCD says 1, ULI standard that's in this table below that they gave us is actually 0.85, but they count 0.15 for visitors.
Yeah.
I don't think it's likely that every 0.15 needs to be for a visitor. We consider it kind of a parking buffer. And so I wrote it up as parking buffer, and then I realized I wasn't really manipulating that number at all. It was just 0.15 all the time, so I just rolled it into the numbers. I don't know why ULI doesn't do that, but they don't.
What about the numbers we've seen a few months ago for if you have bicycle parking?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. 65 bicycles.
That reduction has been removed by request. So
No bicycles.
there are not reductions, and this is a point I should make. These are the numbers that you're looking at right here are the numbers. The goal that we got as we vetted this through everybody else's departments and talked about it amongst ourselves and even with the ULI code was to make it simple. And none of the places where we're talking about, especially in the outlying areas where we're going to institute mixed use zoning, we don't have reductions anymore. There's not reductions for providing additional bicycle parking. You still have to do it. There's still a requirement. You still have to do a bike space per every 5 vehicle spaces up to the 12. That's still in the codes. But we don't give you a break when you do more. You just do more. That's what's written currently.
Could they use that as one of their amenities that we provided?
parking?
Right, additional bike parking
That is
more
a
than
question
they
for you.
Oh,
Let's
okay.
say, well, and I mean that sincerely. Let's say that one of their services, one of their deals was they have, and I believe this is possible because there's concierge garbage service in some of these places. So I would assume that in some places, I've seen them actually, and on plans, there's bicycle repair stations built into the units right out in front, like where you'd bring next to the bike storage that they have. They build like a little bike repair station with some tools that are nailed to the wall.
Yeah, I have seen this too.
So they have bike maintenance spaces. That might be countable. It's not very big, but it's a nice little amenity.
Got it.
It would be up to you guys to decide based on the scope of the project. Well, maybe you're putting one of those on every floor and we'll call that an amenity. But maybe one at the entrance of the building isn't enough. Maybe, but if it's one at the entrance to a building that has 30 units in it, maybe it is enough for an amenity. That has to be
Or
considered.
maybe you have to be in proximity to a trail system.
Yeah, for example, that's great.
And then it's a public amenity and it's,
And they make it accessible to the public.
yeah.
Yeah, that would be great. I would love that. It's a perfect idea. So I'll let you guys take a look at these numbers and you can start telling me whether you think these are okay or not. They do, in the VMU, you're going to see them higher. That's our highest standard. The VMU and the MCMU West are our areas where the parking standards are highest, based on our belief that those are the areas that are going to have the least accessible transit options and the least likelihood that they're going to get out on foot just because of the facilities that they're going to be near.
That's the VCMU West is not an anticipation of any projects. It just is a reflection of current issues that we see in that area.
It is a reflection of reviews we've done.
Isn't it
based on potential
Taylorsville,
projects.
Murray, BRT goes down that corridor?
It does, the Mid-Valley BRT, and that got discussed. However, the Mid-Valley BRT feels very specific to a purpose, to move college kids from coming into the station from around the valley, from that station to the campus.
community
And
college.
there might be some residual help to neighborhoods, et cetera, and even a project that would get built where AISU is, but not enough to really pull the numbers down for overall parking need, we didn't feel like. And again, this is representative of us talking with a lot of other departments and with a consultant as well. So it got considered, but we didn't feel like it was good enough to pull that number down. We could still be talked out of that though, so prepare your arguments.
I'm just going to say, I think based on feedback we've heard from that neighborhood in general, just with the projects along there, keeping a higher threshold probably is not a bad thing for them and the community.
Yeah, well, and again, the other thing that you can do is that this forces them to be context sensitive as developers and say, well, if I feel like it's a great area for 3-bedroom units, then I kind of am saying I feel like it's an area that needs a couple of parking spaces per unit. Mm-hmm. If I'm saying it's an area that's good for 100 units that are 3-bedroom and 600 more that are studios and 2s, well, then I get parked based on that mix, not just on the overall number. So it's not as punishing as it seems when you look at that 2.65 or that 2.5. And again, the real consideration here too is that area, that MCMU West, is where we first started looking at reductions of commercial. They're projects that in there potentially have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet of frontage and none of it any good. So their commercial viability based on a market study was not very good. So they need ways to reduce their commercial. And they can do that in this proposed code. They can reduce their commercial requirement, but they have to give us things to do that. They're going to have to park because they're not going to have, by the nature of where they are in that area west of the freeway, even though they're close to the station, technically, by nature of the sites that they're going to develop down there, they're not going to be as mixed use as other sites, or as mixed use as we would hope. And that's reflected actually in our 2017 general plan. In the 2017 general plan, we pulled large areas of that MU zone are no longer slated in the future land use plan, for mixed use zoning. This whole, my finger is not, there we go. This whole area is now out of the mixed use future land use map and in for professional office and medium density residential. So this MCMU West is very much a reflection of what the general plan kind of found in 2017, that it isn't actually a fantastic area for mixed use. It's passable. And that's kind of what we're riding here. We didn't feel like as a staff, it was fair to say, we're putting in a moratorium. And when we come out of that moratorium, guess what? You won't be in a mixed use zone anymore. That's not really fair. We zoned it mixed use for a number of years, left it that way. We want to create an option that's mixed use, but it's not as mixed use as other areas because it just isn't really as viable. Does that make sense? Okay, now I'll come back to that one. I should have intermittently stuck that map in here. I do that sometimes. Okay, just a couple of other things, and then you can ask any questions, and again, I'll send you these slides, and you can, and feel free when I send you these slides to pepper me with questions by email and phone over the next week as we look at drafts. I'm happy to talk about this. This is all I'm doing. Zach and Susan are handling literally everything else. There's no need for me when this is done. I can just go. The focus in our residential buffering is on three different things: separation, height, and site design, as well as the traditional landscaping and fences. So, and this is zone wide through all the two new and the three existing. We're proposing these buffering for residential. You have to do your typical 10-foot buffer and wall, but we're asking in the code that wherever they have a direct adjacency to a single family zone, they put something beyond that buffer and wall. Either that's where they locate an open space amenity, so there's additional distance, or they locate an access road, or some of the surface parking they might have. Maybe they have an access road and surface parking adjacent to live work units or something there, or townhome units there. That's the place to do that. Wherever you're within 100 feet of that residential, wherever you're directly adjacent to a residential zone. And then trees, we've never specified that the landscaping has to have the 30-foot on-center classic trees. That ought to be there to create a really good buffer over time.
Say I've got a big project.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just go back to RC Willie.
Sure.
And I want to put in a trail system in my buffer zone. It helps the community be able to get in and around.
Absolutely.
Am I allowed to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I could, in my 10-foot buffer, I could have a trail going right through the middle of it.
You could, but you're also going to have to put something else there. So the way that it's written is literally like it said here. You have to have the 10-foot buffer in the wall, but you also have to have something else between. You can't have a building directly adjacent to that 10-foot buffer. If you do, you can't. You have to put something else there. So what I would say is you'd have the 10-foot buffer in the wall, and then you'd put your trail adjacency, and that trail would take up another 10 feet or whatever, and that's your trail adjacency.
Okay.
So that's what we're trying to say here. Exactly. Okay. So there are things that they're going to have to do anyway. So it forces them to think about where to put those things and how to organize their site. So site design, the next category. Buildings located directly adjacent to the required buffer, and that would mean directly adjacent to whatever's adjacent to that buffer, cannot contain more than 8 attached units and have to represent the lowest density units in the project. So my theory is that the objection to 30 feet in height or 35 feet in height or 40 feet in height is not the height. It's the mass of 25 or 30 units together making a 650 foot long building that is 40 feet high. That's a lot different than punctuated neighbors' houses that are 35 feet high and meeting their standard. And it feels more tolerable and feels sensitive to that neighborhood. And we wanted to really be sensitive to that. And because there's density overall, you can do lower density at the edges and then higher density in the middle. And this buffer requirement then of saying you have to do your lowest density at the edges and no more than 8 units in a row, for example, forces them to think about how they're doing that and put their higher density away from that line, and thereby maybe get forced to mix their unit types. And we always want to we really want to see them mix their unit types without outright requiring that no project shall have less than 2 types of units, or et cetera. We don't want to do that, but we want to give them incentives to do different unit types. And that would do that. Height, structures within 100 feet of a single family residential zone, regardless, are limited to 35 feet and 2 stories, and no rooftop patios and gardens should be allowed in that 100 feet.
So what about if someone's able to come in and design a rooftop patio and garden that doesn't look in on the adjacent property. If you
Has a way to
can
not.
configure the building, are you still going to say, no, you can't have a rooftop?
You'd need to configure the building so that the rooftop garden was not within the 100 feet. Maybe the building is, but maybe the rooftop garden's on the other side of the top. Or
So if someone came in with individual townhomes and wanted to put townhomes and the first 2 units were within that 100 feet, you just say, nope, can't do it, even though they could totally orient it away from the residential neighborhood.
So you're saying building is there, but you've got a 10-foot wall on that side.
That buffers you or screens or some other way of designing it.
Picturing it, build it like a house with a pitch on it, and on this side, you come into the house and put the garden.
You know, I would.
Attic. Sorry.
I would say no, and I'll tell you why. Just based on what I've been reading about infill housing, not related to mixed use, but about infill housing. This is a common requirement that's coming out of people having to review more and more townhomes. That's the single biggest complaint. Everybody loves those rooftop gardens. Fantastic. Put them on units that are outside of the 100 feet, and then we don't have the problems. So you might have, maybe you have units that don't have it at that 100-foot line. But again, maybe they're at 80 feet or 60 feet, but your next units in can have it. So orient your site so that the views that you're trying to get are not necessary right there. So that should be, I think that it forces the site design and puts it in there, makes it their problem instead of our problem. And I'd rather do that, honestly, in favor of the residents that are there at the time.
Okay.
But I'm open to suggestions. It's an interesting thought if you can screen it. But the screening adds height, and the height is kind of objectionable too, so I don't know.
Thanks.
And I'm happy to take your thoughts about it. So block length, and I'm going to wrap it up any minute here, I promise. Sorry, Sue, you're fine. Oh, you're good. No worries. You didn't miss anything. I'll send you the slides. One of the other things that we put in the code. Oh, yeah. So, yeah.
Oh, Commissioner Wilson has left.
Okay. Thanks. And
Well, yeah,
we did add some language for site design about block length. So proposed changes in the new zones encourage effective block lengths, and I say effective because we can't do literal block lengths, but block lengths in new development are no more than 300 feet to promote walkability and pedestrian access. And buildings, you can't do a building under the new code without a physical break of some kind for vehicles at least, or pedestrians for more than 300 feet. But blocks can be broken by intersections with interior accesses, public streets, pedestrian pathways and alleys, or mid-block crossings, because you can see in that diagram that Portland, Oregon has these 200-foot blocks. We have 660-foot blocks. And it's not necessarily always possible to carve those up into all these little roads that don't exist yet, new public streets. That's not really viable. So this is a shot Zach got me of, has a name, up in Salt Lake, City Creek. You can see the bridge over Main Street here in the middle. Can you guys see that even though my finger won't? Okay. You can see City Creek here and these big Salt Lake blocks. You can clearly see the blocks in the public streets. When they built City Creek, they did not include a single new public street. But they did do a whole bunch of pedestrian pathways and a whole bunch of interconnected mid-block crossings to make you able to get around without going all the way out and around those stupid blocks, so you can pass through. And that's what we need to promote in the new designs and any new projects that come. And they might not be at this scale, but even one of those blocks, even a single one of those city blocks is done better because of that requirement. You break up that block in any way that you can. And where you can't get, the reason we haven't required it absolutely, the council asked why we don't just make it a requirement. Not encouraged to keep block lengths at 300 feet, but required to. Because there might be cases when we're dealing with 9th East that's a UDOT road and State Street that's a UDOT road where a developer cannot get a mid-block crossing to break that block on State Street up in a way like that. So we encourage it and we'll push it hard, but we don't feel like we can require it absolutely.
It's still a football field.
It is. It's still 300 feet. It's not nothing. Public space and access improvements, we're not proposing any change to that 15 feet. It's 12 feet in the MCCD. It's 15 feet everywhere else. 12 feet in the MCCD and 12 feet in the TOD, but 15 feet in the other zones of public improvement. So at least 7 feet of sidewalk and 8 feet of either landscaping or a furnishing zone with tree wells, et cetera. And that's the diagram that's in our code currently here on the right. We have standards for those sidewalks and street furniture, street trees, et cetera. What we are adding in the CMU and VMU zones that are highly going to be focused on redevelopment of areas that already exist as commercial structures or as commercial projects, they already have buildings that we're trying to encourage them to keep and revamp and reuse. Where you can't where those don't fit in with our standard of 50% of the project has to be within 18 feet of the back of the curb and gutter, we have some flexibility built into the code for them. So we're going to try to pull them out to the streets as much as possible. New structures, you don't build a new one not within 15 feet. But old ones that you don't have to get rid of just because they're not within that 18 feet or whatever.
And you show a nice outdoor seating area.
Yeah.
Are we really encouraging that in these?
Yes. So you can erode, you could do that in these areas here. And where we have, like, let's say we have an existing building that's just been a drive-through restaurant for a while, and in the mixed-use redevelopment, it's getting turned into a nicer sit-down restaurant. We don't want to necessarily force them to pull that out to the street. They've got area out along the street that's been parking, whatever, it could be converted to this kind of space. We want to be able to promote that.
Okay, you mentioned drive-throughs.
Yeah.
Please tell me that you have banned drive-throughs in all mixed-use zones.
I would love to tell you that.
I would really like you to tell me that.
I cannot tell you that, but I will take that to heart as a comment. If you could, and I mean,
If like the MCCD,
if we want to say that we're building walkability, the biggest detriment to walkability is those damn drive-throughs.
drive-through pharmacy though.
And certainly if you have drive-throughs, they shouldn't be allowed in the front of the building. They need to be behind the project, so that the pedestrian is still oriented to the front of the business.
The problem with that thinking is that sometimes that backfires and puts the drive-through, like that little picture I showed you, in the wrong space. It really comes down to design, and I'm still working on language as to how to control those drive-throughs, where they wrap, where they are. Like, for example, I'm going to go all the way back, sorry. So the one that we looked at is not in, that drive-through is in the side yard along this road, right? It's not in the front setback of this building. The front setback of this building violates everything that we ask for in master site plan. It orients to a parking lot, which is its first mistake. And then that has a domino effect to the rest of the project. So the building's oriented to the parking lot, so the drive-through wraps around the back and comes out the side, but it's still in a crappy place for the accessibility of these pedestrians. So it's a lousy design just all the way through. Sorry, South Jordan planners. It's just a bad deal. So we can fix some of that kind of question through our site design process, through that master site plan. But I don't know how to do the language to say it can never be in the front setback, because in some cases, that's the best place to put it for pedestrian access on the site.
Well, okay, so if we can't say it outright, let's take Chick-fil-A, for example.
Yeah.
So that's another one where there's a pedestrian network there, but I still have to go through 2 lanes of people not paying attention, trying to run me over because their chicken is just not getting to them fast enough.
Right.
And there, you still need to somehow figure out a way to prioritize the pedestrian over the automobile.
And I totally agree. And I think we can do that without requiring where the drive-through goes, but by saying the paramount thing is the orientation to the pedestrian. And we do that in the master site plan. There have to be pedestrian pathways that provide access to all these buildings and interconnect them. And if your drive-through is screwing that up, then move your drive-through. We have that flexibility.
2-lane drive-throughs with a pedestrian crossing, that's
I don't think
bad.
we need 2-lane drive-throughs in this. So I could outlaw those. I bet I could get that done. I'll make that a note. Outlaw is the wrong word, but.
I like outlaw. Stick with outlaw.
No 2-lane drive-throughs. They shouldn't be so vehicle-oriented in one of these mixed-use zones that they do 2-lane drive-throughs. Sure. Unless that 2-lane is pulling them out, is keeping them from violating some other part of it, because it's only part of the building in 2-lane. I don't know. Let me work on language, but send me your thoughts on it. That would be helpful, because I got a million things in my brain.
My thoughts are no drive-through, Chick-fil-A bad.
Got it.
Not the restaurant, not the food, the drive-through.
I'll take it and try to see what I can do.
Okay.
So when it comes back for drafts, we can keep talking about it, but I'll try to respond to that as best I can with the other mandates that I've got.
I mean, let's take another example. So we had the Feld project on 48 and State with the USU building, and they were proposing putting a bank down in there.
Yes.
Moving the main entrance of that building away from the drive-through, just anything and everything that can try to build a bigger separation of
the more the separation, the better.
Yes.
And I should point out, in the TOD zone, they're still not allowed. And in the MCCD zone, they're only allowed for banks that we wrote for that project. That's still there.
Can we get rid of it?
We probably could. In the MU zone, I don't know that they were ever banned. And I don't think they were actually in the MU zone. Oh no, they were. They're banned in the MU zone except in conjunction with the master site plan approval. So you get to review it and say, yes, it works, or no, it's not working, so you don't get to do it. And we can have that in the others as well, that they're not allowed except where they're part of the master site plan, and you have to agree as a commission that it's resulting in a better overall pedestrian design. And that's why you're doing it, where you're placing it. Does that work?
Yeah.
I'll beef up that language a little bit for the other zones too.
Okay, thank you.
Now I got to go all the way back to the end. I'm sorry, and I think I'm done. I think those are all the slides. And I know you're exhausted and you're all asleep. I'm sorry.
I could talk about this till 2 in the morning, but.
No, I could. Oh, wait. Oh, last one. Sorry. Open space and improvements. And the last thing that we did, we are formalizing our requirement that there be curbside management plans with all of these, with all new developments, so that they're looking at how we're getting deliveries, how we're dealing with public transportation, how that's all being planned for. And we're allowing for setbacks in areas, like greater setbacks for a building, only in areas where that's needed to occur.
Are you seeing that just for residential, or are you also mandating it for commercial as well? So I could pick up my whatever, and then I could drive over to my other project and drop
Absolutely.
it off? Okay.
Absolutely. Curbside management. And there's,
Then you shouldn't be driving.
you should be walking.
I'm going to walk, but I just know that there's a lot of people that.
No, you could. This is passenger. I mean, curbside management would include passenger pickup and loading, deliveries, even your move-in. You know, your U-Haul comes up and moves in. You got a 30-minute loading zone. We need to, and it's going to be project specific. We have a few standards, but they're very sparse. They just say, show that you've considered freight and move in and pedestrian pickup and blah blah blah. So, but they're kind of fun to talk about. And in the future, we will have much more elaborate and detailed micro-transit considerations for the curbside management. We'll have much more detailed and better plans for that, or standards for it. We don't really have a whole lot of standards for it now. But as that kind of component of planning continues to evolve over the next year, we'll look at beefing up those standards to real standards that need to be applied as we get some experience with it.
Drone parking.
Yeah, drone parking, human drone parking.
El Pollo Chicken or whatever it is are now doing.
Delivering by drone?
They're doing drone deliveries to your house now. So
crazy.
They've started them in California. So it's a real thing.
Yep, it's the future is now.
Implement that.
That's what I have, guys.
So, right, Chick-fil-A just needs to switch.
I'll send the slides out. I'm going to send them to Jeremy and Jake as well, obviously, and encourage all of you to ask me any questions during the week. This is all I'm going to be doing. So I'm open to questions, calls, whatever. Okay. So
who's our friend recording all our minutes? Bless your soul, Jamie.
Sorry, Jamie.
I'm gonna give her permission just to say they talk about a lot of stuff.
Edit Travis.
I said more stuff.
So can I just ask you really fast, like
anything
a
you want.
potential project that we saw with all of these changes, like the Best Buy site, 0.53rd or whatever
53rd, sure.
that spot's called.
Yeah.
So they before could be like 1,000, right, or something.
Yeah, it was a. I don't remember how much it was. Let me think. It is it's almost 10 acres.
It was a lot.
So
and
10
they
acres,
were
they
kind
could
of
have
one of
done
those ones that were like, we won't do that many, but we could.
They could have done 800 units or so, and they were saying, well, we don't really need 800 units. What we were talking about is like 350. They don't need any
But
more
now,
because they're a commercial site. They just want to add some residential.
yeah. So now they're on a major
transit
collector and super busy corner. They already have the commercial there.
Yep.
They could incentivize themselves to do more residential units, whatever. So like, is that before we were like, we don't have a cap, but you're other than just taking your promise of, do we have something now in place for a site like that? That's like, okay, you couldn't, even though you are meeting all these requirements, you couldn't go more than this many units.
No, there's no additional cap. No. So let's say it was a 30-acre site.
Whatever they can meet,
do, they can meet.
They can.
But I mean, again, it's not necessarily the size of the site. It's the density on the site. It's how much is on it. And they're going to be capped at, for example, the point at 53rd, the maximum they would be able to do would be 450 units or so, which is like half of what everyone was so worried about.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not
because we brought down those numbers, the
overall density
so
is down
much.
to 45 is the maximum, and they could get to that maximum maybe if they keep so much of that commercial that they're that percentage over. And if they give us, they'd have to, again, to get that 45, they'd have to not only have all that extra commercial, which they probably have, but they'd have to give us a few side amenities and maybe provide some affordable units, which they probably won't do. like you pointed out. It's not the kind of site where they're going to say, yeah, we'll throw in some affordability. That's not going to happen on the point of 53rd.
And would they be subject to a master site plan? And so we would have an opportunity to correct some of the site issues that it currently has for a pedestrian.
You talking about the double drive-throughs? Yes.
Yeah.
That'd be an option that would happen.
I know Chick-fil-A is its own pad property. It's not going away, but
New one going in.
Yeah.
Be subject to your considerations of how that works. And yeah, absolutely. So 45, their base would be 35 units per acre, 350 units, which is right about what he wanted.
I have to say, yes, that's exactly what I'm going to say. It's intriguing to me. We did all this great work and all this effort put into it, and it didn't really change anything. He wanted 300, 400 units.
But he would have been allowed to. I think that's the part where
I understand, but it still scares me. 400 units still sounds huge. 1,000.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Scary, but 400 still sounds huge.
Yeah. Well, we'll try to. This is
For Murray Park. Murray Park will be.
We mentioned that we
they just count that as their amenity.
Yeah, that'll be there.
We've been trying to find sort of visual representations of what units per acre looks like. And I can't show you what 40 units per acre looks like. Well, I can. I can show you 20 different versions of what 40 units per acre looks like.
Well, look at
but I can show you, I can find a project that is a 400 and some odd unit project with X number of feet of commercial. Actually, the Van Winkle Crossing is a 421 unit project. 400 units. That's Van Winkle Crossing. So he's talking about putting that kind of number of units, maybe, probably less than that actually. He's probably talking about putting 100 less units than that on his site at Point at 53rd, which is about the same size, but with a lot more commercial than they've already got up there.
So second question, these sites that we had seen already and passed on to the council, and if some of these numbers, as we've written them in these new zones, come out to be similar, do you think that I know that they're like waiting, but the standards are incentivizing enough that they would come back and reapply and reconsider?
I believe they would. We've kept that in mind as we've gone through it very much. They've been involved in the process to a degree. Melinda's kept them posted on what we're looking at in terms of density and parking. They haven't been given a workshop like this, although several of them attended the Tuesday afternoon thing we did with the council.
Just to hear what was being proposed.
And we'll provide them drafts of the ordinance when it goes out for the planning commissions. If we put it on the July 15th agenda, we'll give them all copies of the drafts then too. But they're all aware kind of where we were headed. Yeah. And these numbers seem to work for them. So we would expect them all to reapply. Yeah.
Did the public attend much of that, or was it
There were a few public people too. Yeah, not a ton, but there were several. I was up at the table, but there were, 3 or 4 people from the
It was in there.
Yeah, it was around the table in here. So, and they'll all, obviously we'll put the draft up when we send it out for the planning commission's review on the 15th, or for the 15th, we'll post it to the website too, so people can see it.
So what would be overall schedule for this, Jared?
Well, that depends on you guys and the 15th, but the hope is that you're comfortable enough based on this conversation and your review over the next couple of weeks of this slides and the draft that comes out midweek next week, that you guys would be comfortable enough on the 15th to give us at least a forward of the changes to the council, albeit with changes that you want to see made. And then we would make those changes and put it on the council's agenda for the end of July, where they have a meeting where we could put it on the committee of the whole. They always review committee of the whole first. So the end of July, they would review committee of the whole, and on the 3rd of August, they would review it in the regular meeting.
And moratorium lapses when?
The 2nd of August, the day before. Yep. So that's ideal if it goes perfectly. If you're not comfortable with it on the 15th and you're not comfortable moving it on, then that timeline goes away and we bring it back to you at your next meeting on August, whatever it would be, the end of August. We're missing the first.
But that means if someone applies, the moratorium goes away on the 2nd, someone applies on the 2nd or 3rd, whatever, they're back toward the old standards.
Yes. And I would rather put these, albeit imperfect, I would rather put these standards in place and start to make changes. And I don't view anything we ever write as the final version of anything. Yep. If we're back in 2 months making adjustments because we realize we screwed this up, we'll do that. Unabashedly. I'm never ashamed. Let's just bring it back. So, but I would rather do that. But honestly, if you're not comfortable moving it on, then you don't. And most of the things that there were zone change requests that got withdrawn. And with the same zones in place, they wouldn't be able to reapply for those.
Mm-hmm. Well, they'd be applying for new zones.
Yeah, the new zones they'd be able to reapply for. So if you're comfortable enough with the new zones, that's the best option to move them on and get them in place at the end of the moratorium. If not, there's other ways to skin the cat.
But they can't reapply until there's something new to apply.
Well, they didn't, only one of the, only Gary, only the point at 53rd got denied. The others withdrew their applications. So there's some question as to whether they could just reapply for just mixed use. But they don't have, they don't have any better shot of getting approved now than they did. And the reason they withdrew is because it was clear from the council's comments in the committee of the whole that they weren't going to approve them. And that still would be the case, I would assume, if we don't have if they apply for zone changes after the moratorium ends, nothing's changed then. So they'd still just say no to a request for zone change. On the other hand, projects that could be waiting in the wings to apply and we don't really know, could apply if the moratorium ends with the old standards of mixed use or MCCD or whatever else. So we'd rather have the moratorium end with our standards in place, or with new standards in place.
There'll be some businesses that are probably, or some developers that are interested in this. Do they get an opportunity to review and comment as well as the regular?
They'll have the same time period as you guys. We'll give them the drafts. I mean, they could have watched this, and I might be getting emails even as we speak from them about what works and what doesn't. But they're aware of some of the bigger changes. We've been talking to them just the same way we've been vetting it through. Same way we've been talking to the different departments in the city, public works and engineering, et cetera, and to the consultant that did the work for the project on parking. We've been talking to them about parking standards and things that work for them, et cetera. And we feel like we're in line with what they've been telling us all along. They haven't had a review like this with just them and us talking about it like this. And that probably won't happen because time won't allow for it at this point. But we'll definitely give them the drafts that we send to you guys, and they can send us any comments that they have on it. And we'll try to take those into account just like we do with you all.
So I didn't realize that, I mean, maybe I did realize that point at 53rd had gotten denied.
It did.
Based on these standards,
he could reapply.
Basically what he was asking for seems like it would fit within
it does.
That zone.
Yeah.
So how would they justify denying it? You know what I mean?
Well, that's the thing is if the moratorium ended and there were no new zones to apply for, he couldn't apply.
He couldn't,
because it's not been.
But if this passes and he comes back and it's basically the same proposal and the city council, it doesn't.
Well, it's the same proposal, but it's guaranteed by the zoning now instead of by just him saying this is what I want to build.
Right, taking him at his word.
It's what he can build, not just what he wants to build.
Got it.
So I see them saying yes to that probably, but we'd have to review that.
Mm-hmm.
Can't speak for him.
I don't know. I see what you're saying, and I agree, but I also wonder if the citizens who are concerned and then voicing that concern to the city council still might be concerned because the numbers are the same.
They might.
I mean,
don't know.
Our requirements are stricter now. We're confident that that's what they'll build, nothing bigger, which is great, but they're still as big.
It's still mixed use. But what we heard when we were talking to the council, and even in their review and their denial ultimately of the point at 53rd, what we heard from the council is, what we heard from you guys was support for mixed use because you recommended for it, send it on. So that was loud and clear. What we heard from the council was trepidation about the potentials of those mixed use zones that we had, and a desire to have different mixed use zones that were a little more context sensitive, but definitely still mixed use. They definitely still felt like they wanted to move forward with mixed use zones and mixed use zones in other parts of the city.
So how long everybody's been okay with the theory of mixed use? It's the numbers that's concerning. I'm just wondering if these numbers will still be concerning.
I guess the answer to that is
we
no.
don't know yet.
In the review with them on Tuesday, no, they're okay with these basic numbers. They had some comments, but from a large standpoint, they're good with this.
From a citizen's perspective, the people that were concerned by any of the development that's taking place are going to continue to be concerned about it. They're going to continue to be opposed to it. They're going to continue to believe that the Murray of 1965 is still here today, and it's unfortunately not. It's a different time and a different place. We're not going to change that perception. They're still out there.
Yeah.
I think it's so cool, actually, that we've gone through this process of having those applications because you can see directly like the R.C. Willey site. And so the things that have been written and changed into that to protect the neighbor. It's already automatically addressing a lot of the concerns that all of those neighbors had. So
a good case study. Yeah.
Because we did it that way. Yeah, I don't think they'll be happy with it, but a lot of their concerns, I think, are written into how to protect those neighborhoods.
Yeah, no, that's a great observation. Saying that's exactly where we were.
I mean, I know there's still going to be.
Yeah, but the goal is really to, I think the goal, I'm going to speak for you guys for a second and say, because I think it's the same as for us. we still believe in mixed use. So I'm never going to advocate that we just stop doing mixed use because it's just too hard. But I don't want to not respond to the things that really bothered people about it. Outside of things that I can't bring back 1965, but I can respond to buffering questions. I can respond to density and legitimate concerns about the infrastructure strains from the Public Works Department and give them a chance to review every individual project. That stuff we can do, and I think we want to. So give us a good chance to do that.
And do we think that they're getting a better handle on the fact that it is just more efficient use of the infrastructure and the long-term costs are actually less to deal with this?
That idea is becoming more and more well vetted and known and more commonplace. Yeah, it's becoming more accepted. People don't believe it, but the numbers don't lie. So when you're concentrating things, that's more sustainable. Every inch of land that you don't use for building, because you're building up in mixed use projects, is land that can retain rainwater instead of putting it into the detention systems, which we're trying to do as a state. We're trying to do all the right things as a state, and we're stumbling doing it. But we're going to keep stumbling and doing it and keep trying. We're trying to make steps forward with transportation, with transit, with the way we build. And these are all good ways to do that. The WFRC stuff, and I was looking at the new stuff coming out just the other day, Ned. They're reminding us that we need to respond to some of these questions that have been asked about modifying our centers. But their point is still as valid today as it's been for 10 years, 15 years they've been making it to us. There are places in the valley, there are places in the state where it's appropriate to do this kind of use, and we are sitting right smack dab in the middle of one of them. How can we not?
I think it's prudent use of the taxpayer dollar. And I don't know that you're going to get the average public to see that at this point in time, but at the end of the day, these projects are actually taking care of the taxpayer.
Yeah, definitely. That'll bear out over the years. Absolutely. Well, I would encourage you all again, just in closing, to send me any questions you have as we go through it. And if you're comfortable with it, I'll put it on. If you're not comfortable with it, I won't put it on the agenda for the 15th.
Is that all you have?
That's it. That's all. Sorry. I know I didn't need it up to your standards, but I got as much as I could.
That was excellent.
Do you guys have any concerns about it being on your agenda for the 15th of July as a public hearing taking place?
Roughly how many pages is the document?
The documents, because there are 5 of them, lots and lots of pages. So I'm going to give you.
What else is our agenda looking like for that meeting?
2 items.
Small things. One thing at Fashion Place, it's a new building and a zone change, easy zone change.
Yeah. We can do it. And I mean, we've gone through some of the big points tonight, and I'll re-reference those a lot more quickly and in terms of showing you the drafts, but I'm not going to go through the drafts. I don't see the need to go through the drafts line by line because I'm going to give them to you beforehand.
He was telling me
That's Travis.
that.
I don't have to do it because Travis will do it. So we'll give you the drafts and whatever parts we need to go through line by line.
Travis is excited.
Yeah, it's like Christmas. But we'll go through the big points and show you any of the we've gone through the big points, but we can go through the draft in more detail. So some of the verbiage, et cetera. And we can focus more on your areas of concern now that you've seen all of it. Okay. So with that said, we'll put it on the July 15th agenda, which is good because I sent the notices to the affected entities this afternoon. I'll be okay.
And that was
I didn't want to have to retract those. But yeah, so took a leap of faith. So I'll shut up now and let you guys do your thing.
Motion to adjourn at 9:36 p.m.
adjourned.
Travel that, don't you?